beginning of this. However, we did have a closed session. We did have two items on the closed session, which I'll talk about in just a minute. First of all, I want to welcome everybody to the October 5th, 2021 meeting of the San Luis Coastal Unified School District Board of Trustees. At this time, we'd like to ask those in attendance to please keep your videos off and audio muted unless you're presenting information or speaking in public comment. We're offering translation services for our Spanish-speaking attendees. To access translation, please click on the globe at the bottom of your screen and then the language. At this time, we'd like to ask if anyone who might need translation would please click on the participants icon at the bottom of your screen and raise your hand. Hold on just a moment, please.
Buenas noches. Queremos darles la bienvenida a todos y decirles que hay servicio de intérprete de español a las personas que hablan español. Déjenos saber si usted necesita nuestros servicios. Gracias.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much. The board did meet in closed session. We had two closed session topics. The first was a student personnel stipulated expulsion hearing. The second was anticipated litigation, significant exposure to potential litigation. As I explained in item 4.01, we did have a stipulated expulsion hearing. I would like to see if the board is interested in supporting the stipulated expulsion, and if so, I'd like to receive a motion from one of the board members, please.
I'll move acceptance of the stipulated.
Okay, the motion by Mr. Buckman. Is there a second? Second by Mrs. Sheffer. I'm going to take a roll call vote on this. Mr. Buckman? Yes. Mrs. Sheffer, Ms. Dobler-Drew, Dr. Isabel Rodgers.
Yes.
Mrs. Frame, Mrs. Rodger.
No.
And I'm a yes. Motion carries 6-0. And then for 6-1, I'm sorry. I apologize. 6-1. And then I will ask the board members to sign the papers on this particular thing. Let's move on to item 5.02. Do we have a consensus on the order of business? Everybody good with that? Okay. Item 6.01, Hawthorn program highlights. Mr. Mayfield.
Good evening. It's my pleasure to introduce Brittany Tricamo, our new principal at Hawthorn Elementary, with some program highlights from Hawthorn. Mrs. Tricamo.
Hello, everyone. Can I get a signal? Can you hear me okay?
Yep, you're good, Brittany.
Okay, thank you. All right, so my name is Brittany Tricamo. I am the principal at Hawthorn Elementary School, and I'm thrilled to be here tonight to communicate to you a little bit about what's going on at Hawthorn and why this year is promising for us. So as educators, we are in the business of making the world better. We know that the work that we do today with the students in front of us right now could impact the rest of their lives. It could make a positive trajectory for them and for their future and for their children's future. So we're really looking at, the small things that we do today and how they can build and positively impact our kids in the long term. And as a new principal, I feel really supported and empowered by the big system work that our district has done with MTSS, multi-tiered systems of support. We are able to, at Hawthorn this year, bring on 5 academic intervention teachers. So these are credentialed teachers, people that are going to work with our kids in small groups, as well as 4 instructional aides, people that are pushing in and supporting our classroom teachers with what's going on in the classroom. And so with the addition of this staffing, we've really been able to make sure that every single kid at Hawthorn is touched by these MTSS supports. And 82 of our kids are getting that really critical, really needed tier 2 intervention. So I'm going to go ahead and show a video that one of our 6th grade teachers put together. It's a really awesome look at what we're doing at Hawthorn with our MTSS supports. Here we go.
Hi, everyone. My name is Vanessa Parsons, and I am the MTSS teacher here at Hawthorn Elementary. We have some new and exciting opportunities for all students this year, including the MTSS program, which is the multi-tiered levels of support for kids. As we rebound from not being in person for the last couple of years, we're going to be benefiting from this MTSS program with all students in mind. We have instructional aides pushing in during math, and we have academic intervention teachers teaching through the leveled literacy intervention program. We are so excited for all of our students.
That down, and then we will figure out more. All right, but James doesn't let it bother him. How do we know James doesn't bother him?
All right, together, okay?
What did we learn that good readers do? Do you remember this?
Former LLI teacher, I know the value of the small group instruction that the AI teachers are providing, and I'm super excited to see the growth.
As the classroom teacher, I know the AIT portion of our intervention is super important for those students who are not performing at grade level, but I have really seen the value in being the classroom teacher for those students who are with me for that portion of time, for those 30 minutes, that I am really able to target and accelerate learning for many of the students who are reading on grade level. So that's super exciting.
I like wind time because we get to work on stuff on our own, and it helps me get my work done.
Time drives me so I can read my book.
I like wind time because it's more relaxing than other activities.
I like this time so we can get our work done and have our own time to actually work.
I like reading coaching because it helps me better with reading.
And I like reading coaching because I like all the books we read.
Our value for this program is allowing students to achieve all across grade levels, and with our vision in mind as well, providing equitable education for all students to achieve here at Hawthorn.
Okay. So that's it. Are there any questions?
Well, thank you, Brittany. Yeah, board members, do you have questions for Mrs. Tricamo? Mark?
So Brittany, that was great and I really appreciated it. Have you worked with MTSS before? Is this your first shot?
Well, so I was hired as an MTSS TOSA the very first time we brought it on board last school year. So I have a dip in that way, but other than that, I've just been in this district. So this is like our first experience seeing it in person up and going.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody else? Well, I would just like to say thank you very much, and we're really excited about the things that you are doing at Hawthorn. And of course, you're standing on some big shoulders there with the work Mr. McMillan did too. And I just want to acknowledge you as somebody who's really come up through the district. As people watching may or may not know, Mrs. Tricamo actually was a colleague of my wife's in a special ed program at Del Mar. She began there. And it was obvious at that time that she was really going to be a great teacher. And Brittany, that's the reputation you had as a teacher. I want to, really give you kudos for that. And then what I'm also really excited about is this is an example of our district being able to really build its own team from within. And I think we've done that with some of our other principals, with you, as well as Mrs. Jones and the principal at Sensheimer as well. So it's very, Mrs. Miller, it's very exciting. And it's very exciting that you guys are doing the great job you are. And I'll just close with, when I first began on the board, Hawthorn had about 180 students. Remember that? For those of you who've been on for a while. And we actually considered closing Hawthorn. It was, we had some very serious debates about that. We chose not to close Hawthorn, and look at you guys today. It's so exciting, and it's so exciting the work you're doing. So congratulations, and congratulations to the staff, and congratulations to you, and of course, congratulations to your students, your parents, and your community. Thanks, Brittany.
Thank you so much.
Let's move to item 6.02, our student representatives to the board. And so do we have Nick or Noah here? Okay, why don't we start with Noah first, and then we'll go to Nick. Noah, welcome.
Hey guys, can you hear me all right?
Yep.
Awesome, thanks for having me. So our biggest thing coming up is we got our homecoming week next week, which we're super excited for. We have a lot of activities. We're kicking off with our outdoor rally on Monday, followed by spirit days every day. We have a lot of sports games going on. And then, of course, our homecoming football game on Friday, which will be held at Morro Bay, due to the fact that we don't have a field right now, but we're super excited for that. We're going to be playing Templeton. And then we have our homecoming dance on Saturday night, which is very, very anticipated. And everyone's super excited to be able to have a dance now that something we haven't had in a while. So we're super, super stoked for that. In other news, we had our first Student of the Month barbecue last Friday. 160 students were recognized for their academic achievements in the classroom, and every teacher had the ability to pick 2 students that they're teaching to go and get some free burgers and vegetarian burgers, which was pretty fun. It was a cool little thing the ASB put on. And also ASB is putting on Bike to School Day tomorrow, where students are encouraged to bike to school, and I believe they're rewarded with donuts and a cool little sticker that says "I bike to school," which is really awesome by our sustainability team. With that, we also have our first student congress meeting tomorrow, which is a super cool program at SLO High, where every 3rd period class is able to elect one student to represent them and go to a meeting where they get to hear from the ASB, from the staff, from the administration about what's going on at school, along with being able to voice their own opinions and any concerns they have or anything they want to bring up to the staff and the administration, which is a pretty cool thing we have. I'm really excited to get that going this year. And lastly, I just want to talk about our athletics. We have we're having huge turnouts at our sports games, which is really cool. We had a volleyball game against AG last week that we ended up winning, girls volleyball game, where we had a huge student section, which was really fun to see because it's something we haven't had in a long time. And our boys water polo team beat Rigetti for the first time in 20 years, I think, which is super awesome. So things are going really well at SLO High, and we're excited for homecoming. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Noah. Any questions for Noah? Okay, let's move on to Nick. Hey, Nick.
Hello, how are you?
Yeah, we're good, thanks.
Good. Perfect. So the ASB events that are coming up are going to be the dodgeball tournament. That's going to be, I believe, the 12th. That's super fun. It's usually one of the most participated events that people do at our school. And then the blood drive is on Thursday. So I'm not sure how many kids are doing that. Usually not a whole lot, but a decent amount are excited about that. I think I'm going to be personally helping out with that. So I'm interested to see how that works. And then as far as sports, we won our game against Templeton, and also, sorry, this is a little bit confusing. Cross country also had their mid-season meet on Monday. Water polo, girls volleyball, and girls golf are all going well too. And then, like Noah said, the slow high game, their home game will be at our stadium in 2 weeks. And then we are facing slow on Friday at our field, which everyone's super excited about. And then as far as clubs, FFA is doing super well, and they're competing in a public speaking competition at Paso High, and that'll be super cool. And Drama Club is planning their winter performance. We have members of our choir attending the California Central Coast Regional Honor Choir, and that's in San Mateo. And then our Skills USA group is getting together with their advisors for that. And then something super positive at our school is we did like a counselor wellness survey, and about 70% of the student body completed it. And 70% of the students are in a club or a sport. And 75% of the students also reported that if they have something stressful, a problem, something like that, they can confide in an adult on campus. And that was just something super positive that I wanted to leave on a positive note.
Hey, thanks, Nick. Any questions for Nick? Dr. Isabel Rodgers.
Nick, are you welcoming members of the community to donate blood? Or is it just for students?
I'm not sure. I believe it's only for students. It is going to be like during school hours. So I'm not exactly sure how that works, but I will be working at the blood drive so I can report back to you with that.
Okay, I know in the past I have been able to give blood in the old gym, so I'm guessing, let's just welcome the community if they're able to do so. But if you'll get back to us, that'd be cool. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's just for the students, but I'll definitely get back to you.
Great, thank you. Other questions? Well, thanks to both of you guys. And we appreciate it as always. Like I said, you're always willing to stick around, and you're always welcome to stick around and comment on any items that we might have that might be of importance to you. But of course, we also recognize that you probably have homework and you probably have some other things that are equally important. So again, thank you very much.
Cool, thank you.
Let's go to item 7.01, correspondence. The board did receive one letter from Malaki. I'm sorry if I mispronounce your name. Malachi and Melissa Iguara regarding the Pledge of Allegiance. So thank you very much for your comments. We'll move on to public comment, and I do have a statement that I want to read before we begin public comment. At this point in the agenda, the board welcomes comments on matters of district interest. The board will listen but cannot engage in discussion or take action on items not listed on the agenda. Generally, this section of the agenda is for individuals or a representative of a group to address the board on issues not listed on the agenda. Speakers who wish to discuss items on the agenda are requested to wait until that item comes before the board. However, comments may be given on agenda items at this time if it isn't possible for the speaker to stay until the agenda item is heard by the board. If you submit written comments on a topic, you will not be allowed to also speak on that topic. Comments or correspondence submitted anonymously will not be accepted. If you'd like to speak in person, please complete a yellow public comment request form and submit it to Mrs. Dawson. In-person public comments will be read first. If you wish to speak via Zoom, click on the participants icon at the bottom of your screen and select raise your hand. When your name is called, you may restart your video if you wish and unmute your audio. If you need assistance with your video, please let us know and we will attempt to fix it. If you have a problem with your audio, please click on the thumbs down icon and we'll attempt to assist you. Written public comments submitted prior to the board meeting will be read by Dr. Isabel Rodgers following the verbal public comment. All public comments will be limited to 3 minutes, a limit of approximately 450 words in written comment. You may not cede any remaining time to another speaker. Any portion of your comment extending past the 450 word limit may not be read aloud due to time restrictions. All written comments that are not read into the record will be made part of the meeting minutes, provided that such comments are received prior to the end of the meeting. Please be aware that written public comments, including your name, may become public information. Thank you very much. I believe we have one person in attendance this evening for public comment. Dr. Isabel-Rodgers, do you want to?
Lauren Williams.
Thank you.
Good evening. I want to thank you for moving the podium up so we can see your faces from here. So I am here this evening. I'm kind of losing hope in all of you. So I just want to say that segregation at the homecoming dance is not okay. If vaccinated kids can spread COVID-19, then they should also have to get tested. To single out children because of a vaccination status is immoral and awful. My son wrote a list of things he needs to do for the homecoming dance: get an outfit, get flowers, get his date's ticket, COVID test. Come on, all these kids go to school together. You don't need this measure. There aren't thousands of kids at your school that are coming down with COVID. And FYI, the PCR test you cannot use after December of this year because it failed its own testing. It cannot differentiate between influenza A, B, or any coronavirus, just to let you know. So I'm done talking to you guys. I would like to talk to the people that are listening. We are taking matters into our own hands. And if you are tired of people taking money from the government and dictating what you can put into your body or not, and on your face and not, then contact me at freedomcommunity@protonmail.com and we will help you out. If you are a teacher, a staff member, a parent, or a student, we don't have to listen to you guys to give our child an education. So I'm tired of you guys thinking that you can do whatever you want and take whatever money you want from the government to mandate these things for our children that are not healthy. This vaccine is not a vaccine. It is not, by definition, pre-2020 a vaccine. And the road we're going down is dangerous. I've tried to talk to all of you about vaccine clinics at your school. I've tried to talk to you about masks. I've tried to talk to you. You're deaf in the ears to this matter. This is dangerous territory we are going into. So we're taking it into our own hands. freedomcommunity@protonmail.com. Contact me and we will get the people that need help. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is there anybody else from the public here who would like to address the board? Okay, I'm not seeing anyone. Mrs. Dawson, is there anyone on Zoom who wishes to address the board? We're seeing no one. Then we'll close public comment. And we'll move on to item number 8.01, business and budget update. Mr. Pinkerton.
Yeah, just two quick items. We have the hazard mitigation plan review. So we've been going through our hazard mitigation plan. And so we have a public opportunity, and that is going to be on October 12th. That Zoom went out to all the staff as well as all the other school districts in the area, and I will also share that Zoom link with the board. The second thing is Stolcog 227 Los Ranchos interchange. So they are doing having some public meetings, conversations about all of 227 through the airport. Just congestion, safety. They looked at roundabouts in those areas, in like 3 different roundabouts actually on 227. So there's a public meeting to discuss that, which is on October 12th from 6 to 8 p.m. So any interested public members or staff members of the board that would like to kind of hear about that, you can attend that as well. And I will also send that Zoom link out to the board.
Okay. Any questions for Mr. Pinkerton? Mr. Pinkerton, I would be remiss if I didn't ask you to talk to us about food services and a couple of things that I thought were pretty exciting.
Yeah, so well, in the board, we have shared with the board. So Aaron Primer, we had a great visit recently with Salud Carbajal, our congressman for the area. And so some of that conversation that came out of that was actually an article that ended up in NPR on the radio, as well as was recently an article that was in the New York Times, which included some quotes and information regarding Aaron. So again, just super fortunate to have Aaron Pramer, leading our food services department.
Great, thank you. Okay, Mrs. Frost, Educational Services Update 8.02.
Yes, just a couple of things to share with you happening across the district in educational services. Career technical education had a professional development day today, and it was really very successful. The CTE teachers from both of our comprehensive high schools came together. Liz Moore, Leslie O'Connor, they spent some time putting together a really powerful PD where they reflected on data, enrollment, looked at planning for the future, and also made it into the community to visit some industries. So really a positive day. We also had our first superintendent student senate last week. Just an amazing group of students who come together from all of our secondary schools. They work within their sites, setting goals, looking at data, discussing campus climate, and they really are instrumental in Youth Truth. So they help us make sure that it's implemented on their campuses. They look at the data and then they make decisions on goals for their sites based on what they see. So just really an impressive group of students. Dr. Prater really leads our sessions, but we also rely on our site principals to make sure that what they're talking about in those sessions go back to their sites. And we really think it's made an effect across our district. Just a couple more things. Staff open forum for COVID. We had an open forum last week, had 50 staff members attend, ask some questions about COVID, about their classroom safety. It was really a nice event, giving them an opportunity to ask some questions. And then we are planning our next open forum. And for this one, we are inviting the families of our English learners. And we're putting together a presentation that not only looks at COVID and answers their questions, but also opens it up to other questions they have about their school, about their children's education, everything along those lines. We're in the planning stages, and we'll definitely let the board know when that is coming and make sure that you have the Zoom link to join us.
Okay, thank you, Mrs. Frost. Questions for Mrs. Frost? Okay, item 8.03, Measure D update, Mr. Pinkerton.
Yeah, so just one quick thing. We do have the facility master plan overview coming to the board next week for the study session. So we'll be reviewing that, some of the work that's been done, a draft, and hopefully getting some good input from the board on kind of our direction. So thank you.
Okay. Any questions for Mr. Pinkerton? Item 9.01 is a determination of sufficient textbooks and instructional materials. This will be a public hearing. This will be presented by Mr. Mayfield. Mr. Mayfield.
Yes, good evening. Each year the board is required to certify that we have a sufficiency of textbooks in all core academic subject areas of English, language arts, math, science, and history, social studies. It's done in a two-part process. The first part is tonight, the public hearing to garner any public input into sufficiency of textbooks. And then the second part is a resolution brought to the board at the next board meeting for your consideration. I can tell you that we have spent the first part of the year ordering and supplying all needed instructional materials, and we're currently sufficient in all areas.
Thank you. I will go ahead and open the public hearing. So please, if there are any members of the public who would like to address the board on this item, now is your time. For those of you on Zoom, we will be monitoring that to make sure that you get an opportunity to speak. So I'm opening this public hearing. Seeing no one who wishes to speak, I'm closing the public hearing.
Thank you.
Thank you. Item number 10.01, multi-tiered systems of support achievement. This will be presented by Mrs. Storm. Mrs. Storm.
Hi, good evening, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And my plan is to stop every couple slides and check for questions. I know it's a little bit harder to see you up here from Zoom. So let's get started and talk about MTSS. I'm so excited to share all the progress that we've made with you. And before I even start, I want to shout out our amazing TOSAs that work up here in Instructional Services. We have Corey Maitri and Michelle Cass full-time and Jenny Appel part-time. And then we have 11 MTSS teachers out at the elementary sites, all except teach. And they have done an amazing job getting this going out there on the ground. So huge kudos to them for all of their hard work. So just as a refresher, MTSS stands for Multi-Tiered Systems of Support. It's a system and it's a lens for viewing supports. It's not a program or a time in the day. And we're still getting used to that in St. Louis Coastal. You know, sometimes I hear MTSS time or that kind of thing, but we'll get there. You know, it's always an adjustment when you have these new things, and it's academic and social emotional as well. So it's also very systematic. We always start with universal screening. We need to know who is at risk. And then from there, we dive in and pinpoint the area of need. And that's a lot of times deeper assessments, maybe one-on-one kind of things. And then, of course, instruction, going after those areas of need, and then constantly monitoring and adjusting, making sure that whatever it is that we're doing is working. So with that, I'm going to jump into universal screening. We did this back in August and September, and we did K through 11th grade. And again, screening just identifies risk. I think last year I talked a lot about that analogy of going to the dentist. We really honed in on reading. The MTSS teachers helped coordinate it at the elementary sites. Some of those assessments in elementary, especially in K1-2, are one-on-one. So we had instructional aides helping with those. It was a big effort, but we got a lot of really great information about where our students are at and who is at risk. So before I go on, I'm going to check for questions.
Any
Are we good?
questions from board members? So far, so good? Okay, looks like the board is good. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to work backwards tonight for a reason with our screening data. And I think you'll see why as I get there, but we gave an assessment called A reading. It just means adaptive reading in 9th through 11th grade. And almost over 80% of our students were low risk. That's awesome, or advanced. This is kind of on par with probably what we would have seen before pandemic. So strong reading at the high school level, but again, that achievement gap persists. You see it there with SED and EL. So then moving into middle school, 7th and 8th grade, this is a little bit lower than what we usually see in San Luis Coastal. Usually we're more like 75% of students like on grade level or low risk advanced. And again, we have that achievement gap, especially with English learners. I think about 7th and 8th graders, and if you're an 8th grader, you were on Zoom for most of 7th grade and for the end of 6th grade, which are some pretty formative years as far as being an independent learner, taking more complex text, right? Like the rigor really goes up in middle school with reading. And then if we look at elementary,
Hey, Laura, I think
Yep.
Mrs. Frame has a question for you.
yeah,
Hi, Laura. Thank you. One question I was thinking as you were, can you hear me okay?
I can hear you great. Thanks.
Okay. One thing I was, question that I had is as we're looking at FastBridge and, we'll be taking the SBAC, have we, how are they FastBridge assignments aligned with SBAC? Have we looked at that? Are we,
We
is
are,
it unknown?
yeah, no, we are definitely looking at that. And from what we can tell, they're fairly similar in this way. SBAC this year gave us a Lexile level. So, SBAC is reading, writing, listening, right, and research. So the overall score is more than just reading, but it gave us a Lexile level. So we were able to pull the SBAC Lexiles, and we were able to pull the A reading Lexiles. They seem to be fairly close. Are they perfect? No. And I think we also saw some summer slide, right? Because SBAC was at the end of the year and this was at the beginning of the year. But in general, they were fairly close, which is encouraging. So we're really excited about that SBAC Lexile portion, really honing in on the reading part of SBAC. Anyone else? Okay, if not, I'd love to talk about our 2nd through 6th graders. This is really interesting. We saw, we see some unfinished learning in 2nd grade. That doesn't surprise us, right? These were students who spent quite a bit of 1st grade on distance learning and the end of kindergarten on distance learning. Those are some really formative times for becoming a reader. And then again, we kind of went up, and then 5th and 6th grade. And I was thinking about this and I thought, okay, in 3rd and 4th grade, we take students from learning to read, decoding, right, fluency, and try to kind of take them into that reading to learn and more comprehension based and more nuance in stories around plot and things like that. It just gets more complex. And 5th and 6th graders are expected to be much more independent. And so I think we're seeing a little bit of that play out here. And again, we see our achievement gap. So let's talk about.
I think Evelyn has another question.
Okay.
No, just go, if you can go back to that slide real quick. The only question I had is that drop off that we're seeing in 5th and 6th if we were to look at, over the years of our SBAC, do we typically see a drop and this is just more dramatic, or is this really unusual that we're seeing this drop? Or is there typically, do we see kind of just because, as you said, text complexity and, more independent, less cues for the reader?
I would have to go look, and look like pre-COVID. And if we saw that with our grade levels, I think they were pretty stable, but I would want to go back and look at some of the data from before then. I wasn't, I'll be honest, at that point, I was a site principal. So I was really focused on the school site, and I would want to look at the district data again. I could see that being the case, but I'm not 100% sure. So I can look at that for you for sure. Anything else?
Well, I would just say, I think for the public, SBAC are the mandatory state testings that our students take, and FastBridge is our district assessment, so that we can keep track within house of how our students are progressing. Is that a pretty fair way of saying that?
That's a wonderful way of saying that. Thank you. I forget that not everyone knows our lingo. So, so that's 2nd through 6th. And then we assessed using, it's a FastBridge assessment, but it's called Early Reading English. And we assessed kindergarten and 1st grade at all of our elementary schools, including Baywood and Pacheco. They gave the English assessment. And what is fascinating here is to see our 1st graders and where they are at. I don't think anyone is really surprised when you think about kindergarten being most of the year on distance learning, that first graders would maybe be a little bit, I hate saying behind, but because they're not behind, but they just have a lot of unfinished things with learning to read. And we're seeing this play out right here. And I want to mention we screened kindergarten because we wanted to know where they were coming in, because some of them didn't have the typical preschool experience that they would have. And it scales heavily towards concepts about print. And so it looks a little bit higher, I think, than maybe it would if you just gave a flat score, because a lot of them do know how books work. And that was the major part of the assessment, was do they know how books work? But we screened our kindergartners too. So first grade, we are putting a lot of time and a lot of energy and a lot of focus on these really young readers. So I'm going to stop there and check for questions. Good?
Mr. Buckman.
Yeah, thanks. This is it's really interesting data, and I really like your takes on it. You're right on, I think. I'm looking at this chart, and I'm looking at SED students, and I'm looking at students with disabilities, about the same percent. Is that common that they would be at about the same percent?
Could be. I mean, I can flip back and kind of look. But yeah, I mean, it does. The gap is there with students with disabilities too, right? We have, SED, and we see the gap, and we see the gap with English learners, and we see the gap for students with disabilities. So it just sort of varies depending on the assessment and the students, and I think about these sizes, like there's 58 students in that group. That's not, a real huge sample size, but we're not a huge district either. So, so I always think to be a little bit loose with the percentages, couple here or that way, just because it's such a small group, but it could be.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Dr. Isabel Rodgers.
Hi, I'm sorry. I just need to go backwards just a bit to 5th and 6th grade on the reading. I was pondering this as you were talking about, geez, what does happen between 4th grade and 5th and 6th grade? What are some of the additional tasks that we're asking those students to do, and other parts of their brains we're asking them to use, that might reflect why there's a drop? Because so I'm thinking about, my own children, where they're going through this. So they were learning to read. Now they can read. Now they get to the point where not only do you need to read the book, but you need to be able to interpret it and give us information about it. And so it seems to me as though there's a layer there, and there's a reason maybe for that gap, because it's a skill that they're acquiring and they haven't really completed that skill. Does that make any sense?
Absolutely. And so I kind of hear you saying that they're being asked to do that sort of beyond the text work, where they are thinking more deeply and tying it to other reading, pulling out theme. Sometimes in 5th and 6th grade, they start to see plot lines that have a lot of flashback or flash forward, right? And those are all things that make text more complex. So I think it makes sense here. And I also know 2nd and 3rd graders spend a lot of time in real kind of straightforward text, and really building kind of the fluency piece of being able to read kind of with automaticity. And so it's just interesting, but I think there's something to that. But what really just speaks to me is that we have work to do. So any more questions about this one? Okay. And we already talked a little bit about 1st grade in relationship to kindergarten. So I wanted to know more about 1st grade, and I thought you would too. So I pulled out by school, and what I saw here was so fascinating, because 2 of the highest performing schools here were 2 that came back earliest in kindergarten. That was CL Smith and Sinsheimer. They brought their kindergartners back in person. I think it was about October, November of last year. So it just really plays out here in our data. We see our gap again, but we put our resources in the right places. This confirmed for me that we definitely have our eyes on the right, on the right schools and the right grade levels and that kind of thing. Questions about this one?
Laura?
Go ahead, Mrs.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I don't have a question. I just wanted to make sure for if anybody's viewing, if you could explain, what that chart means, like percent of low risk, what that number means and what it 42% is low risk. So that means how many are high risk? Is that?
Yeah. So the early reading assessment tells us if a student is either high risk, some risk, or low risk. It doesn't give an advanced. So we are looking for the percent of students that are low risk. You notice they never say no risk, but low risk. And that is kind of our comparison, to how we used to say proficient. So these are the percent of students at each school that are in first grade that are low risk. Okay. And so then I told you that we gave English assessments at Baywood and Pacheco, but the early reading assessment also comes in Spanish. And so we were able to do screening in Spanish at Baywood and Pacheco. This was so exciting. I don't know that we've really been able to do something this quick and easy for Spanish in the past. And again, what do we see? First grade. It stands out again as an area of need at our dual immersion schools for learning to read in Spanish. Questions on this one?
Okay. Go ahead.
So then we were asking some more questions, and I knew you would be too, about, well, we launched a dual immersion program at Baywood last year. It was the kindergarten year, it was their first year. How did that go in relationship to our existing program at Pacheco? And how did that go for our subgroups? So each color here is a subgroup. So we have like the teal color is Baywood overall first grade in Spanish and Pacheco overall first grade in Spanish, percent low risk. What was fascinating to me was I came over to the English learners. So students who are coming from homes where they likely speak Spanish. Most of our English learners are Spanish-speaking families, come from Spanish-speaking families. And so 7% of our English learners were low risk in Spanish. Fascinating, fascinating. And then we had Pacheco at 45, right? And then I said, I wanted to know, okay, but what does that look like for students that are coming from an English-speaking home with Spanish, being assessed in Spanish? And so Baywood, it was 62% were low risk, and Pacheco was 76% low risk. It was so fascinating. And I have all kinds of theories, and I have little proof. So I'm going to be talking to them about what they think. But a lot of times we see students come in with their English learners, and they come maybe from a Spanish-speaking home, but they might not be solid on Spanish or English. And so they're coming in kind of language deficit in general. And then also, frankly, starting a dual immersion program on Zoom had to be so incredibly challenging. A new program, teaching a language on Zoom. I know it was really challenging for Pacheco, and they've been doing in-person dual immersion for years. And so to do it on Zoom, that just had to be that extra lift for Baywood. So I'm going to stop because I bet we have questions.
Dr. Eisendrath Rogers.
I don't think,
Followed by Mrs. Frame.
I'm seeing on the chart that we probably weren't able to do this, but I'm assuming that if we follow this graph and we follow them all the way through junior high and high school, we would see those same kiddos flying high. They're the ones who were struggling in the beginning to learn whatever the second language was. Once they have both of those languages under their belts, the sky's the limit, right? Am I seeing that in the correct proportion?
I think the key phrase there is once they have them both languages under their belt, right? So if we assume that they eventually become low risk in Spanish and low risk in English, yeah, the sky is totally the limit. But we have to make sure that's happening, that they get to that place by the time they're leaving these programs.
One follow-up question. And so are you finding that gnarly piece of it to be more evident among our English as a second language learner population than with the English learning population that's learning Spanish?
I'm going to have you repeat the beginning of the question. You got a little tech garbled there. What was the beginning of it? I'm sorry.
Sure. Let me try it this way. I'm guessing that with our English language learner students that they are, it's going to be a little slower improvement for them because they're learning two languages, and then they're going to be solid. But the children who have both, they're learning a second language with English as their first language, that it's the students who are, let me see how to describe this. So the students I've observed who already speak English and then they're adding a second language, it's easier for them later as they go through their school education. And it's harder for the kids who are learning two languages literally at the same time. That's
right.
My comment. I'm wondering, yeah.
Well, and I'm not nearly the expert on this as Mr. Mayfield is. So he's welcome to jump in if I talk out of turn here. But my understanding of language acquisition is it's always easier when you're solid in one language. So, right. So that would go with what you're saying of if you come in and you're a really strong Spanish speaker, you're going to have an easier time with the English, right? Or vice versa. It's when you really have no solid language that it's really hard. It's harder to develop that. Any more questions?
I would just add that some of our English speakers, native English speakers who elect to attend a two-way immersion program are some of our strongest learners in the district, and parents elect it for that reason.
True.
I think, Mrs. Storm, what you're referring to is students with a strong L1 are more likely to be able to learn an L2. For those of you who don't know, their first language, then their second language is what I'm talking about.
Absolutely.
So I think Mrs. Frame, you had a question?
First of all, I'd like to applaud us really disaggregating the data in this way, because it on the one hand, I can look at it and it is alarming, but on the other hand, if we don't really know what's happening within our schools, and we really can't address it. So I really applaud us really disaggregating the data and really, buckling down and really seeing what's going on. So the question would be for me, when we go into that slide of, what next, what are we going to do on an MTSS level above and beyond, given this great need?
Absolutely. So I can speak to the dual immersion right now. I think that's probably makes the most sense. I've been working with the teams at Baywood and Pacheco. They both have two people working on MTSS. One of them sort of leans towards more of the upper grade English, and the other works more towards the primary Spanish, but they do work together, which I think is really fantastic. And they are doing a lot of Spanish intervention. So one of the things that's happening in first grade is a lot of these students aren't just some risk, they're high risk. They're what we call pre-A's. So we have a continuum for reading, and it starts at A, and then before that is an asterisk or a pre-A, they're not even a reader. And so they're doing a lot of push into the first grade classrooms of doing some quick small groups where they're seeing kids for 5 to 10 minutes to really hone some of the skills that they need to even take off to read. And then we have both sites doing Spanish reading groups in primary, first, second, I believe third grade too, a little bit. And for example, at Pacheco, they have over 120 students getting that Spanish reading support. So it's robust. And then what I think is one of the best things that's happened with this is those two teams meet weekly and they're collaborating across the sites. So we have them kind of going back and forth of what's working, what's not working, developing some of the intervention materials together. It's hard to find things in Spanish. I'm sure you've heard that before. And so it's a real collaborative effort, but our eyes are definitely on this data and we know it's an issue. And in fact, we opted for Baywood to fly the position for another academic intervention teacher that's bilingual because we want to put even more support into Baywood. I really hope we can staff that. That would be phenomenal for them. So there is a lot of focus on this and we're serving a lot of students through both pushing into the classroom, doing some small things on the spot, and then doing those kind of strategic reading groups.
And just, if I may, a couple of follow-up. One is, so have we had any parent concerns? I mean, what we're looking at is really intensely providing the support. And, that would be one question. And the other thing, and this, based on, I think what Mr. Mayfield said and what you were talking about, what happens if we have students who have, we're talking about students who have deficits in Spanish in their primary language, their L1, Spanish, their L1 language. What happens to students who are coming into the program who are low in L1 English? Because we have those students. How does that work? Because we do have students across the district who are, they have poor language skills within, English. So how do we address that?
Yeah, the beauty of having this data is that we know exactly who these students are. And so we can hone in on exactly who these students are and what their needs are, which are identified by the assessments that we give them. So, and to have it at the beginning of October and to be able to have a team of people push in to do this work with kids, I think we're going to see progress pretty quickly.
So would we, for those students who have deficits in English, are we looking simultaneous because they're learning Spanish? I guess, what does that program look like? Because we need to also increase their L1. I mean, I guess, how does that work?
Yeah, well, we're actively engaged in talking to both programs about their English language development as well, and making sure that we have support there. Dawn Addis is working with both Baywood and Pacheco to make sure that we beef up ELD instruction for those kids.
Ms. Dobler-Drew.
Are there other factors like technology? I know the district has been very good about mending the digital divide, but could it be that there wasn't good reception, or, that the parents couldn't help them technologically, or were out working and also couldn't be there to help them, those kinds of factors?
I think that was a factor for every student at every grade, in distance learning. I think it was more pronounced in first grade because they generally were 5 or 6 years old, doing kindergarten on Zoom.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
I mean, so that's just, that right there is just a heavy lift. So,
Yeah.
yeah. Okay.
But before you go on, I just want to clarify something and then I have a question for you. So I guess I think what your question, Mrs. Frame, because this is kind of an interesting question, was we have a 90-10 program. And so 90% of the instruction is delivered in Spanish for those young kids. And I think what you're saying is, how are we meeting the needs of English language learners whose English language, native English speakers,
EOs,
native English speakers whose L1 is not what we would expect, but yet are in a 90-10 program.
Yeah.
Did you feel like you got that question answered? Because I'm not sure that would be just a very tough place for a kid to be, I would think.
Yeah.
Sure. And again, I would say as a group in general, that's our strongest pool of learners probably in the district for many different factors. But a highly articulated ELD, designated ELD program is super important. And we are working on that actively at both dual immersion programs. So 10% is a small amount of time in kindergarten, but that is a very purposeful time, and the instruction is very intentional during that time, and it expands over time. So 20% in first grade, 30% in second grade.
So the ELD is also given to the EOs?
Correct. And I'm assuming that's during their win time, right?
That would be one way of doing it. No, but there
supporting that.
are other times, there's specific ELD time within the day of those two programs.
Okay. And then I'm curious, is there a preschool effect here somewhere? I'm looking at your it's hard for me to read, but your early Spanish language, first grade, Baywood and Pacheco. I'm just wondering, because do you see a preschool effect between the two different schools?
It's a great question. And we'd have to dig into that a little bit further, but that's a great question, because there is a dual immersion preschool program at Pacheco and an English preschool program at Baywood currently.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Well, and Mr. Unger, I went back a few slides here to try to possibly answer your question. And we assessed the kindergartners in Spanish. And the results were fairly high. But again, the assessments really skewed towards things that are like letter names, concepts about print. But that is interesting. I think we'd have to dig into that more, like Mr. Mayfield said, but that definitely could be a factor in this high kindergarten number, is that they are coming prepared. I don't know.
Okay, thanks. Any other questions on this slide? Okay. Do you want? Oh, I'm sorry, Mrs. Rodgers.
Yeah, I don't have a question on the slide, but I am having difficulty understanding my colleagues speaking through their masks.
Okay.
So I wonder if I could ask people if they would mind removing their masks when they're speaking,
You did.
Sure.
since we are distanced. Thank you.
Okay, so
You
we
wanna-
have
Go ahead.
anything else? Okay. I knew this would bring a lot of discussion, but I think it's really great conversation to have. And I'm sure you're wondering, well, so what are we going to do about this? So we have done some training around understanding the FastBridge results. The site administrative teams at secondary met with Mr. O'Connor, me, some of our TOSAs to really talk about what does this mean and how can they use it at the secondary level with teachers to understand where students are at in reading and growing reading. And then at the beginning, I mentioned our 11 MTSS teachers at the elementary sites. They spent a whole Wednesday staff meeting really helping teachers dig into the results and understanding what that meant for their classroom and for their planning. So we've been able to really start helping people understand how to make this data actionable, which is just so critical. Why have data if you're not going to do anything with it? And then of course, leadership teams are looking at trends. Those MTSS teachers, remember I was talking at the beginning about how we, in the cycle, we look at risk and then we go deeper. So they were able to look at risk and identify which students needed to have maybe some deeper assessment so we could pinpoint the need. And then using multiple measures. So no decision was made about any student and maybe what kind of intervention instruction they were getting based on just a FastBridge assessment score. We looked at data from last year. We looked at maybe if we had it, the SBAC results, assessments we gave this year, input of the classroom teacher. So it's always about multiple measures within MTSS. I'm going to check for questions. Okay. So I promise I didn't pay Mrs. Tricamo for her presentation, but she really helped me do this slide. So we are addressing this through something called What I Need Time or Win Time. It's targeted instruction for all. We have small group level literacy intervention happening at that time. So we have students going with the academic intervention teacher to get that intense reading instruction. And then we have the other students with the classroom teacher doing real targeted work on whatever it is that they need. And so we've had professional development around this, both the level literacy intervention and the win time, looking at data, guided planning time, and then we're continuing with a lot of follow-up support, being out at the site, seeing how it's going, checking in, finding out what people may need and trying to get them that. And the best thing I can do is show you a video. So this is a small group at Monarch Grove. These are some kindergartners, and they're in their small intervention group doing onset sounds. And I don't even think you need the sound, so I'm not going to unshare and reshare, but you can see there's just 3 students working with the teacher in this small group. And that happens to be one of our academic intervention teachers. And then the students that are in the classroom, this is what their win time is looking like. So we have some kindergartners working on writing their name. This is fluency. They're listening to themselves talk on the little phones. We have some readers. We have the teacher working with a group. And then these students are doing a phonics sort. So it's small group, it's individualized. Teachers are seeing students one-on-one or in group, and then they're rotating. And so everyone is getting what they need during win time, as you saw from Hawthorn. Questions about that?
Don't see any questions here, Mrs. Storm.
Okay, awesome. And so one of the pieces that is the most important component of one of the most important components of MTSS, but is often overlooked, is progress monitoring. So we are bi-weekly collecting data on our students that are in those intense literacy groups. We are plotting their growth. So we have a line of what they should be doing. And then we are also plotting where they actually fall to make sure they're making adequate progress, so that if they're not, we can change the intervention. We can know, okay, it is working, let's keep going. Or, hey, they're doing so well, we're ready to fade. And so we can be fluid and move students in and out. And this is such a key point to MTSS, is that you always need to know, is it working? Is what we're doing working? So right now, where we're at, we're living in that cycle that you saw of instruction, monitor, and adjust. We're refining and developing, we're getting feedback, we're helping teachers hone in their win time, helping our academic intervention teachers with their small groups. How do we make those better? We continue to think about tier 1, that universal instruction for all that needs to be as strong as it can be. So we can do a lot of prevention. And then, believe it or not, we're getting ready for more screening. In grades 2 through 6, they do those screeners as part of the report card. So we're going to see some data here in November. And then we'll screen our K1 students again using early reading in January. So we're really excited about all of this work and the systems that are coming into place with all of this and the cycle, and really using data to go after what individual students need. Questions about MTSS?
Mrs. Frame.
Yeah, I just had one quick question. You know, the data is really helpful, and I thank you for that. The one thing I was thinking as you were presenting this is, how are you all managing just, you know, students entering, exiting the quarantine? Has that added another level of complexity for the classroom teacher or MTSS, and in ways, I mean, we certainly couldn't have foreseen any of it, and, you know, hopefully things are calming down, but I guess, what does that look like? Because I'm sure that's another layer of continually monitoring, right?
It is another layer. And we actually opted to build our progress monitoring tracker in Google Forms so that we could have a place for notes, because the FastBridge system doesn't allow notes. And we felt it was really important for people to be able to say, this student was out on quarantine for 10 days, or in some cases it's like 20, right? If it's a family member, that kind of thing. And really some of those key things related to COVID, and other things, of course, too. But yeah, it definitely makes a difference. You know, attendance makes a difference. We know that. And so it's complicated when they're out on quarantine, but we also understand we have to put safety first. So.
No, I was just, you know, appreciating that it's a, you know, it's not just we're looking at the MTS, we're looking at, you know, student safety of our staff as well. So it's just that other layer that we're navigating through. So thank you. Appreciate it.
Okay, other questions from board members? Now, I know this isn't an action item, but I will go to the public to see if anyone has any questions or comments on this item. Seeing no one, thank you very much.
Mr. Unger, may I make one more comment?
Of course.
I just want to point out what a huge undertaking this has been. And today we had a principal meeting, and the principals to a person commented that it's gone very smoothly. They're kind of impressed with how smoothly it's gone. And when you think about how many people we've hired, how much training has taken place, how from Laura and her team of MTS TOSAs to site administrators to our classroom teachers to our MTSS teachers, it has been a tremendous undertaking and a change in the structure of how we instruct kids. And for it to be going this smoothly, it's not an accident. And so kudos to everyone who's been involved.
And I believe this also gets to one of the board priorities, which is strong data, and being able to strongly analyze the data and get the data useful in ways that help our teachers teach. Because that's really, you know, in our business, that's what we need, is data that's informing instruction. And I think that's pretty exciting. So thank you very much, Mrs. Storm. Now, board, it's 10 minutes to 8, and we did begin closed session at 5:30. I need a little break. Are we okay if we take about a 10-minute break right now, rather than wait until after item 10.02? Okay, so we're going to go into recess until 8 o'clock, and then we'll begin again. Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody. We're back in open session. We'll move to item 10.02, career technical education update.
Yeah.
And that would be Mr. O'Connor. Mr. O'Connor, welcome back.
Thank you, guys. I appreciate the opportunity to be here this evening. I'm going to talk this evening about career technical education, or sometimes referred to as CTE. We're going to be talking about career technical education pathways and programs here in San Luis Obispo. Before I begin, I want to give shout out to Liz Moore. Liz is our CTE TOSA, who has done an amazing job over the past, I think it's almost 8-9 years now, working from a district TOSA position to really pull together and to work with our secondary sites and our teachers and our site admin to really grow and develop that common theme and that common message around CTE. And, you know, I feel very blessed to be able to stand up here and talk through the presentation that, like, Liz put 90% of all this together, and we kind of touched on it and talked about it a little bit, but Liz deserves all the credit and detail that goes into this. I also want to say that one of the common things that you'll hear from me this evening will be linkage. And it's a little ironic because I love what Mr. Mayfield and Mrs. Storm talked about with regard to the FastBridge assessment and the universal screening. And I want to give a shout out to our secondary sites also, because we also did a diagnostic assessment through FastBridge. We actually did it for the first time, 7 through 11. And so we were able to meet with all of the site admin teams and actually talk to them about what we were seeing with regard to the FastBridge data when we're talking about Lexiles and we're talking about morphology and phonics. And it really spurred that conversation. So as we begin this presentation, we're also talking about linkage between our 2 high schools, but also the importance of our middle schools. And we keep coming back to that. The second piece I want to frame out, I did a deep dive into advanced placement the other evening at our board meeting. I'm going to spend the equal amount of time with regard to a deep dive into our career technical education plans and programs, because they're equally important. And it's important to emphasize that from the beginning. So when we talk about CTE pathways, we're talking about career technical education. And there's some key information that always comes to mind. You know, the CTE pathway, a key number that you want to think about is the 300-hour minimum. And again, the 300-hour minimum is set by the state for us to be able to have a complete pathway. And obviously our teaching staff has a designation that would be a CTE credential. In fact, in many of our cases in our district, many of our teachers have a single subject credential, and they will have a CTE credential on top of that. And it's something to bear in mind. And they're fantastic, talented teachers with rigorous curriculums. And those are things that we want to think about. Also, when we develop CTE pathways, we also have to think about advisory committees that go along with that. So we're always trying to link back to industry. And again, there's curriculum and model curriculum standards that we have to think about. So much like we talk about an English language arts class or a math class, you're talking about the proper credentialing, you're talking about standards-based instruction, and there's a system in place, and there's an oversight, and there's a linkage to industry. And again, that linkage will come up over and over again. You're going to hear various information, technical terms, and some of these may be familiar with you and some others you may not be aware of. But we're going to be talking about 2 specific high schools, obviously Morro Bay and San Luis High, but we're going to be talking about perhaps introductory courses. We're going to be talking about concentrator courses and perhaps capstone courses. We're talking about sequencing. And we're going to be talking again, coming back to that 300 hours being the base minimum. At Morro Bay High, 4 semester courses would equal that 360 hours. And at San Luis Obispo High School, a minimum of 5 trimester courses would make that 300 mark be roughly around 310 to make that base minimum. So it's something to think about. And that's again set by the state. Now, what's interesting as we delve a little deeper into this, in some instances, you'll find some pathways that will actually have 6 trimester courses at San Luis Obispo High School. For example, ag is one that comes to mind, and we'll see that a little bit later as I delve into it. So just some things to think about. We'll have conversations around. I wanted to quickly review and give you an update on the staff at each of the high schools, and talk about the fact that when you're looking at an FTE or an allocation, about 25% of our staff at Morro Bay High School, 11 teachers are really involved in our CTE programs and pathways on offer there. And at San Luis Obispo High School, again, equally 11 teachers involved, but it makes up about 11 to 12% of our teaching force. Obviously, one staff's larger than the other. But also kudos to Liz and the district over the years, the investment in the FTE you're seeing there, 9 to 11 approximately FTE allocated at the school sites, which makes it possible for students to have a great choice. And that choice will also be a common theme as we work our way through this evening. On this slide, I remember when Liz worked with our CTE teachers at San Luis Obispo High School and with the Morro Bay teachers to develop a graphic that really started to spell out what were the offerings at the two specific high schools. And across the top, you're talking about at Morro Bay specifically, we have 8 industry sectors. And then underneath, you've got a listing of all of the pathways themselves and then the courses that make up those specific pathways. Again, at Morro Bay, you're looking at a diagram that shows you concentrator classes, perhaps being an A and a B, and then capstone classes being an A and a B. And again, within this diagram, you're going to see courses that may suffice or be part of a dual enrollment program, and those are indicated also. So again, this gives you a graphic that kind of explains the process, the plan, the pathway. And this is a great marketing tool when it comes to explaining to students and to parents, because it gives them at a glance what we're talking about. And there's lots and lots of nuances that she's worked with the teachers on. So this is the Morro Bay graphic. And then at San Luis Obispo High School, there are 10 industry standards, or sectors, excuse me, with a variety of different pathways listed here again. And again, you're noticing that in some situations, and you've got introductory courses, then you have concentrator courses, and you have capstone courses. And you're seeing there's a commonality of a theme where there's 5 trimester courses to complete a pathway. In some instances, there's 6 trimester courses to complete a pathway. I'll reference that in the ag program. There's a couple of ag pathways that actually require 6 to complete that, set by the teachers themselves as they're working through the pathway. This is a slide that, again, I give Liz total credit on. She worked on analyzing at Morro Bay High, and then I'll flip to San Luis High in a moment. But essentially, she analyzed every senior transcript from the graduating class of 2021. Okay, take that for a moment to think about that. And she analyzed every single transcript, and she created a graphic that tells us how many semester courses, CTE semester courses, the students at Morro Bay who were graduates completed or took on the left-hand side as I'm looking at the diagram. And then it tells us how many students in the next column took those number of courses. So for example, I believe at the top left, you're seeing 0 CTE semester courses at Morro Bay. 2 students took 0 CTE semester courses. And all the way at the very bottom left, as I'm looking at it, you had 24 semester courses taken by at least 1 student. So it's pretty amazing when you think about it. And then you think to yourself, well, what was the size of the graduating class? And the size of the graduating class was 194 students. And somewhere in between, students made their selection of courses throughout their entire high school career. This isn't their senior year, this is their 4-year career. And if you're looking at this, you're thinking to yourself in the back of your mind, you remember that they have to complete at least 4 semester courses to complete a pathway. That's the base minimum. And if you look across and you say, wow, 4 semester courses at Morro Bay, there were 13 students who took at least 4 semester courses. And of those 13, 5 completed a pathway. Pretty interesting, pretty phenomenal. I got reference at the very bottom where you see the graduating class of 194 students last year. 144 students completed at least 1 pathway at Morro Bay High School. 67 students completed at least 2 pathways. I pick another number for you to review and think about. Students who took at least 10 semester CTE courses. There were 19 students who took at least 10 semester CTE courses. And there were 19 students who completed at least 1 pathway. And 7 of those 19 actually were able to complete 2 pathways. And again, we'll come to this theme over and over again about choice. We'll come to a theme about linkage, and I'll dabble in that in a little bit. I want to show you something with Slow High similarly. At Slow High, you have the opportunity for students to be able to take trimester courses that are CTE courses within pathways. Again, I started at the top left with Morro Bay, and I'll start with the top left at San Luis Obispo High School. At San Luis Obispo High School's graduating class of 341 students, 22 students did not take a single CTE course. And if you go all the way to the very bottom left as I'm looking at it, we had one student at San Luis Obispo High School who took 23 trimester CTE courses. Huge range in between. If I go back to the top and I say, well, at San Luis Obispo High School, you need to have 5 trimester courses and to complete one pathway. And we look at 5 trimester courses, students who took at least 5 trimester courses. There were 27 students who took at least 5 trimester courses. And how many students completed one pathway as a result? There was 2. Now, when you look from 0 to 5, we have a lot of students taking 1 trimester of CTE or 2 trimesters of the CTE course or 3 or even 4, but we know it's impossible to complete a pathway because you need at least 5 in the same pathway under an industry sector. So again, theme that we'll come back to over and over again will be, why is this happening? You may have some preconceived notions or predetermined notions like, why is this taking place? There's approximately about 120 students there that did not take enough classes in order to complete a pathway.
But that's interesting you're mentioning this right now, because one of the notes I took, and I guess what I, thinking back to our last meeting when we talked about AP, what I wrote was, so is it fair to say that fewer Morro Bay High students are taking AP classes, but they're completing more career pathways, right? And San Luis High students are enrolled in more AP classes, but taking fewer career pathways. So is that one of the questions you guys are kind of asking yourselves? What's going on with that?
Well, it's one of the questions or one of your hypotheses coming into the conversation. It's something that you might come in with a predetermined notion. Okay, maybe culturally, for some reason at San Luis Obispo High School, is there a greater emphasis in enrollment in the AP program as opposed to at Morro Bay? And is there a greater enrollment in their CTE courses at Morro Bay than at San Luis Obispo High School? And I would argue that that just scratches the surface a little bit. I would argue that there's a lot more detail that has to be dealt into to really fully understand, because again, it comes back to linkage and it comes back to choice, and then it comes back to philosophy. And a philosophy allowing students to dabble, or having students perhaps complete a prescriptive path towards a completion that we might have to talk about as well.
I think Mrs. Sheffer has a question.
That's interesting, Mr. O'Connor, that you ended on that, because I just wrote down after that, is the goal to finish a pathway or to dabble in a variety of CTE experiences?
It's a phenomenal question, and it's something that I don't have an answer for. And I don't think that any of us are in a position to have an answer for it, to be perfectly frank. I think a lot of it comes down to the student experience. And I think that one of the things that we pride ourselves in our district, and one of our goals and our mission and vision, is to create creative, courageous thinkers. And it's really important as we think back to the work we're doing right now at elementary with I Innovate, and we're encouraging students at the elementary level to dabble without pressure, to think about going into an I Innovate lab and try and create. And we talk about maker spaces, and we talk about the opportunity to be well-rounded. I think it also continues that same vein, that link through middle school and eventually into high school, because it's a philosophical piece. Should we encourage, should we nudge, cajole students to be able to complete a pathway for the sake of a data point? Or should we encourage the dabbling to find your way, to try and create a lifelong learner for them to pick that up? Because remember, when we're talking about CTE or career technical education, we're not talking about ending in 12th grade. We're talking about that lifelong learner that'll carry into the world of work.
So one way that one could choose to look at this would be as very valuable information that does not need to be particularly judged. That it's solid, useful information to see where student interests lie, but it doesn't mean that we need to say, oh my gosh, we need to be having more kids at some particular school take pathways or something.
Absolutely.
And then how much of this reflects the difference in schedules between the two schools?
It's a great point. It's a great question. And it's something I'm going to come to in a moment. But again, I'll go back to the linkage piece. When you scratch the surface and you go underneath a little bit and start to think, why is it that at Morro Bay students are completing pathways with greater success compared to what we're seeing at San Luis Obispo High School? The master schedule has a lot to do with it. And the students, when they're enrolled in a CTE course at Morro Bay High School, the classes are linked. So if I take fill in the blank digital media A, I'm automatically linked into digital media B in the same year. So therefore, a student starts in digital media A, let's just say, for example, their 9th or 10th grade year, and they're automatically scheduled into B. So they've completed that concentrator piece right away. At San Luis Obispo High School, the classes are not linked. And that's because we don't have an A and a B. We have an A and a B and a C. And it's a lot more problematic, and it's virtually impossible to really delve into how do we link those courses to make sure that they're completing them in a somewhat of a prescribed fashion. But that's something that, as you scratch below the surface, but it also comes back to choice, because you have a situation where you've got such a breadth of robust offerings at both school sites, but you also have choices of other programs that somewhat compete. You've got competition within the CTE arena itself, but you also have competition vis-a-vis band, choir, athletics, AVID, drama, theater, you fill in the blank. And when you have the ability to link your courses, and when you have a plethora of offerings, you have to come back to the philosophical. Is it better for them to get a more robust, well-rounded, dabbling kind of experience, or is it better for it to be a little bit more prescriptive in some way? It's just a data point.
And
I think Catherine was first, and then you, Mark.
I'm trying to make sense of the box that says 5 trimesters is typical length of one pathway at SLO High School. So that would be, for example, I guess if you wanted to take chemistry for, you'd want, if you're interested in chemistry, for example, you would need to take a year and a trimester to complete that pathway.
Great question. So I'll pick ag as an example, where ag would have woven in chemistry, but it would be ag chemistry. And so if you go back to, it's a previous slide, but if you look at the industry sector for San Luis Obispo High School, I think it's probably 2 slides back. And then if you're looking at agri-science is a pathway at San Luis Obispo High School. And so if you're looking at agri-science, you've got the introductory for that particular pathway is ag biology. You've got an A and a B. And then the concentrator is ag chemistry. And then the capstone is, my mind went blank. It's ag systems management.
Yep.
And in that specific example, it's actually not 5 trimester courses. It's actually 6. So when you started and you said 5 trimester courses is a typical one pathway at San Luis Obispo High School, that's absolutely true, but you have to take them in sequence and in order. So in the 9th grade, a student would take ag biology, A and a B. And in 10th grade, they're going to take ag chemistry, A and a B. Now, to complete that specific pathway, they have to complete it with ag systems management, which is the capstone, A and a B. Well, it's dependent upon can they, and is it offered their junior year? Can they take it their junior year with the A and the B? Is it offered their senior year, and can they take it their senior year to complete that specific pathway? But let's take that example. The student does ag biology, A and B, their freshman year. They do ag chemistry, their sophomore year, A and a B. And they really want to see what auto looks like. And they also play a sport. And they would really like to see what welding looks like. They're probably not able to come back to finish the ag systems management because their courses have kind of taken them that path. And so that's when we talk about the linkage piece, we talk about the courses offering, we're talking about the concentrator and the capstone. So it's not just culturally at San Luis High, they're offering more of a robust AP offering and less of a CTE piece. It's just a little bit more complicated than that. I hope I answered your question.
Yes, I think you did. I just need to just add though, that I think by nature, the trimester system gives you more variety and more choices to have as a student, which is fantastic. But it may disrupt something else that you're trying to accomplish. And so I think that's something that we have to think about. And like, what is the value and what does that accomplish? And we have these options two different options at two different high schools, which makes that possible for some families to choose. Anyway, it's a complicated situation, isn't it? With this,
It is, and as I go a little deeper into data and subsequent slides, I think you'll get an eye into what it really looks like when we start to talk about it as well. Other questions?
Mark, you have?
Yeah, actually, it's a comment. I liked what Ellen said earlier about the dabble in things, and you said earlier, but as we develop more and more of these pathways in these CTE, it's so different than what it was in the past. We had, auto shop, we had CAD, we had a few things. And I believe that curiosity is just a powerful teacher. And so I think it's great that we have the ability to dabble and the ability to concentrate. Where in the past, I don't think we necessarily had that. And I think it's wonderful.
I agree with you 100%. There's
choose one or the other, but it's phenomenal either way.
Okay.
Okay.
Let's go for it.
So now we're looking at here at the graduating class. We're talking about my title at the very top. I can't see because of the slide. So Mandy, sorry about that. Can you guys tell me really quickly at the very top of the slide what it says?
Graduating class CTE completers.
Yes, thank you. So thank you for that, Eve. So when we're talking about the graduating class of 2021 at Morro Bay High School, if you remember, there was 194 students that were enrolled. 75% of last year's graduating class had completed a pathway. 75% of the graduating class had completed a pathway at Morro Bay High School. And at San Luis Obispo High School, it was 24%. That's a pretty startling difference between the two. And if you look at 2018, 19, 20, you're seeing that kind of continue all the way through for the last 3-4 years. And again, when you talk about the why do we see that as a trend? It does come back to that conversation about linkage. It comes back to that conversation about choice. It comes back to that philosophical belief about dabbling or more prescriptive. And there's no definite answer, but I'm just posing that as a question. But it is something to think about when we're looking at that as a data point. Here, we're looking at students who met A through G, and I'm going to give a presentation after this with regard to A through G. So at San Luis Obispo High School, graduating class of 2021, you're looking at 69% of the graduating class met their A through G requirements. And at Morro Bay High School, 58% of the students met their A through G requirements. And again, as we get into the conversation about A through G requirements, you're talking about the ability to have that college entrance for the CSU or the UC. And a telling statistic will probably come in the next slide. What does it look like for both? Where is that? And what does that look like? But before we do that, we want to talk about, when we talk about double dippers a little bit, or we talk about bang for your buck or investment, whatever the phraseology you want to put, and you say to yourself, well, is there a sweet spot, so to speak? And what does that look like? And here's an example. I picked ag biology, and it's ironic, Catherine, did you ask the question about ag biology? At Morro Bay High School, ag biology meets the A through G requirement for life science, just the same as ag biology meets the life science A through G requirement at San Luis Obispo High School. But if you notice, there's a subtle difference. The ag biology at Morro Bay meets the concentrator piece of the pathway. But at San Luis Obispo High School, the ag biology meets the introductory piece. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I got another question for you. So attendance at a community college doesn't require A to G requirement, doesn't require a completion of your A to G requirements.
That's correct.
So do we look also, there's a couple of ways I can look at this. I can say, does one school have more students matriculating or graduating onto Cuesta where it's not necessary because you'll pick up your 2 years at Cuesta and then go on to a CSU or a UC. And that allows you to take more career pathways, perhaps. Do you know what I'm saying? I mean, I'm curious about that. And I'm wondering if we look at the percentages of students who are going on to a community college where this is not necessary, which means you have actually more freedom in your high school scheduling than you do if you're on that, got to go to UC, got to go to CSU right out of college, right out of high school.
Well, I would suggest that I think it's possible to do both, to be honest. I think it's possible to prepare yourself with a rigorous course load to be prepared to have the option of entering a CSU and a UC by completing the A through G pathways, the A through G requirements. But I also think it's possible to weave in the dabbling and the opportunity to complete a pathway at the same time. I do believe that that's possible. I also think we have a great junior college and a Cuesta promise in our own backyard, but I also think that the research would indicate that if a student begins at that 4-year university, they have a greater likelihood of finishing their degree, oftentimes than a student that begins at the junior college. But that's probably a conversation for another day. Okay. And that's something to think about also. Eve, I'll take your question in 1 second, but I just want to point out to you where the double dippers at the top is kind of a point that I really would like for us to move toward at some point as we have the conversations with our school sites, because this is a link that shows you the ability to have courses that actually meet both. It's more of an integrated model, and I'll come back to that in a second. I apologize, Eve.
No, no problem. So I thought that they could also, in addition to the talk about whether they're at Cuesta or Cal Poly or CSU, another CSU, I thought they could also be in a business, in an apprenticeship, taking good, in the quote, real world. No. And I thought that business apprenticeships fit into the CTA.
Yeah, it's one of the areas of growth that we're defining in our CTE pathways, where we're really trying to link industry, because one of our growth areas is to constantly come back to the relevancy piece. But you're absolutely right. The internship is an area of growth for us in our pathways at our high school.
I would think too that could be an exciting endpoint for them to work toward, to want to complete the pathway, that they could then connect in and even start making, after the internship, say for a year, they could start making some money there too.
Absolutely. When we had the opportunity to go out with I Innovate a couple of weeks ago, when we were in industry, one of the things we heard.
I missed it. I won't go into the reason, but I just wasn't feeling well that day.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. Well, one of the things we heard from industry partners was the fact that they're constantly looking for a workforce that have had a job, and ideally an experience and an internship is a value add that we would all agree is so important. The specific link that I have on this slide is kind of like the next iteration, like where we would be able to go. And I'm going to use a couple of specific examples for you. These would be courses that would integrate CTE type requirements or courses and merge them with A through G requirements. For example, geometry class. It's an A through G required class for graduation. For the A through G entrance. But if we were able to merge that into a construction class, so it would be the use of geometry through the construction would be a great example of that. As we look at this next iteration, and Liz and I met with our CTE teachers this morning from the various high schools, we started to talk about and start to problem solve through this. But there's still some work that needs to be done, whether it be course adoption, looking at new courses, but we also have to think about the credentialing issues for teachers and the subject matter competency. And we also have to be able to communicate and articulate to our students and our parents the significance and importance of how do we integrate in what we can perceive as the traditional A through G type course, algebra, geometry, maybe algebra 2, and how do we weave that into a pathway course? Questions, thoughts?
Well, I had one other thought, and I'm just curious. Don't we send post-graduation surveys to our students? Aren't we required to do that?
I can't speak to that.
Does anybody know if we are? I thought we were.
Yeah.
I've never seen one.
Okay. All right. I for some reason thought that was something we did. Okay.
I
never mind.
will tell
Oh,
you,
I
I
see
will
Mrs.
say-
Moore's got her hand up.
Sorry, go ahead, Liz.
Oh. Yeah.
So Ms. Moore said yes to your question,
Yes.
Mr. Unger.
Mrs. Moore says
And
yes.
as part of the
Okay.
grant, we have to send out a survey to our students.
Right.
I also know too that the students, all students now have like a number through the student database, right? So there's a lot of tracking that can now be done as students matriculate to community colleges or colleges and how long they're there and if they finish, those types of things. So there's a lot of data we can get now that we didn't used to be able to get.
Okay, thank you. Mrs. Sheffer has a question.
Yeah, I think that one of the last comments you just made was really interesting in that we've worked, I know it's been a goal of the board to make sure that new courses are A through G compliant. And I think it's a really interesting way to look at it, to think that new CTE courses be, I mean, that they intermesh that way, that A through G courses also fit into a CTE pathway if possible. So that seems, that's a different kind of double dipping that we can do as we look at approving new courses that could be really interesting to provide greater opportunities to our students without working within a framework that already exists. That what would it take to make more of the courses we already have both CTE compliant and A through G, you know, and the more we can do that, the greater the opportunity for every student, it seems to me.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's also important to note that through Liz's work over the last several years with the sites, all of our CTE courses are A through G approved courses. That's really, really important. But where we really want to kind of delve and go is to try and make sure that we weave in courses that are in the subject matters themselves for A through G that also make that CTE pathway completion a little bit easier, if that makes sense. So I use the example of geometry, but geometry in a construction class, and the course title might be Geometry and Construction. And so therefore, the teacher would be weaving in the standards of geometry and math, which would make part of that requirement of A through G, remembering in that the fact that for math specifically, you would have to have 3 years of math. So usually algebra, geometry, and algebra 2, but at the same time, they're actually working in the field of construction, applying and integrating the geometry in that course. That would be the ideal model.
And then I have one more question. When I was thinking about the number of courses required and contrasting that against the number of students who complete courses, and it's my understanding that some of the CTE courses would be considered kind of the higher level, you know, courses for that as they go through the completion process. So does that mean if they're, I'm going to try and say this in a way that it makes sense even to me. So if that means that there aren't that many students who complete, are those higher level courses, how many students do they have?
It's a really good question because, you know, I'll pick an example at San Luis Obispo High School that we're going to see an increase in the completion rate if we're looking at this data next year, because this year we're offering capstone courses in some of our pathways in some of our industry sectors that we haven't been able to offer before because we've had to grow the base. And because you have to give some time for the base to grow and flourish and nourish it, and then bring it to fruition in a capstone. So for example, in digital media with two amazing teachers, and one, you know, who is our teacher of the year and our county teacher of the year, Zach Roper, he's going to be offering for the first time a capstone course in his industry sector, in his pathway. And this is his 5th year. So he's got students taking that introductory program course and students who are taking that capstone course, obviously not in the same room, but it gives you the opportunity to complete something. At the same time, because students you know, choose different paths and different courses, sometimes we're running capstone courses at both high schools with, in some instances, maybe 10 or 12 students. So when we run that capstone course, if it was a 5-unit class, or if it's a double period class, that takes FT out of the equation for the teacher perspective as to what they can offer or teach in their daily load, if that makes sense. And so there's a myriad of reasons why, as opposed to just sort of kind of thinking one thing or the other. Well, the students at Slow High are obviously not completing pathways because they're really just focused on AP courses. Well, that's not necessarily accurate. And the students are obviously not focused on AP courses in Morro Bay because they're completing pathways. That's not accurate either. It's much more complex. When we put both data points together on the same slide, this is what we have. When we're looking at those students last year graduating class who met the A3G requirement and completed at least a pathway. Does that make sense? So I'll remind you at Morro Bay High, 75% of the graduating class last year completed at least a pathway, and 58% of the graduating class met A3G. Well, what percentage did both? 48%. At San Luis Obispo High School, 69% of the graduating class met A through G. And what percentage did we have meeting a career pathway? I think it was 24%. So what percentage did both of those? I think it's 13%. 13% of the graduating class last year met both. And so the sweet spot, as we've talked about, is how do we integrate courses that meet both of those pieces while still preserving the need for choice and the opportunity for students to dabble in and explore. Questions?
Eve?
How few students can a class meet with?
That's a great question. The easy answer is it depends. It really does depend. You have to get into those kind of micro questions and analysis. As a former principal, I've seen classes having as few as 6, 8 students. At a smaller school site like a Morro Bay, you may end up with 6 or 8 students because that is the capstone. And so from a personnel perspective, and thank you, Ryan, from a fiscal perspective, our district has helped support that and nourish that, because we would never have capstone offerings if we were going by course enrollment and you said, arbitrarily, I'm just making this up for you, oh, we need to have at least 12 students in a course before we offer the capstone. We might never have 12 in that specific year. So we might have 11 students or 10 students saying, gosh, I really want to complete this pathway and I want to take advantage of the capstone. And I'd love to take an internship in this field, but the course is never offered because we're a smaller school or an enrollment and such in that field is less than some arbitrary number. So I'm not sure if I answered your question, but try to give you a frame for it.
No, I think you did. And it's a good equity measure too, because with the small class size, those kids can get a lot of attention that way.
You bring up an excellent point. Again, it's that kind of micro example where you're thinking to yourself, in a career technical education class with space and hands-on learning, what is a manageable number of students that are in the class to begin with? If it's in an industrial kind of shop, traditional place of construction, where's the safety number and what's that sweet spot with enrollment? Is that, traditionally like a chemistry class where there's a cap of 35, or is that somewhat less than that? And then how much hands-on experience is being provided because of that? But then again, you have to balance that out with trying to grow your base so that you have more students being able to take advantage of the capstone class when we get there. An example that comes to mind was Latin at San Luis Obispo High School with Mr. Weinscheid for many years. We really intentionally grew our base in order to have more students have the opportunity to take AP Latin when they got to that end of their courses by their junior or senior year. So there has to be a system, there has to be a plan, and there has to be a plan in place. And I will give total credit to Liz and the team. And I will also say total credit to the work that was done at Morro Bay High School in not only linking the courses, but looking at how do we leverage the enrollment as best as possible to try and make sure that our students at Morro Bay High complete at least a pathway at that time.
Sounds great.
You're welcome. Anyone else? I wanted to point out this particular slide because you know that we've went with a different student information system. We moved away from Power School and we moved to Aries. And this is one of the benefits of Aries when we start to talk about how students and how counselors and how parents can start to monitor not only their A through G completion, obviously their GPA, but also the career pathway piece. Because in Aries, this is an easy to see usage by counselor, by the student, for them to be able to look at various pieces of their puzzle, so to speak, with regard to their transcript. And this wasn't possible with Power School previously. So I give credit to Kim McGrath and the team for bringing Aries to us a couple or 3 years ago, and for the board to work through that. But this is one of the benefits of this. But I also wanted to point out on this particular slide an interesting nuance. At Morro Bay High School, they have an intro to law class as part of a pathway. And they also have a criminal law course that's the capstone of that course. When I talk about credentialing and when I talk about teacher certification at Morro Bay High School, the students, by taking the intro to law, because it's an A through G approved course for language arts for English, are able to actually achieve a 5th year of English through that specific course. Now, that's really fascinating and ironic because the UCs and the CSUs are constantly coming to the high schools now and asking for students to have 5 years of English in 4 years. And that's really problematic if you think about it just from a numbers perspective. But here, I believe, Alan, is your point where here's a way to be able to achieve that whilst also ensuring that students are working through a pathway that leads to a completion in an interesting, rigorous course. And I just wanted to use this one as an example of how that's been achieved. So kudos again to Morro Bay for having a teacher that has the industry experience, has the single subject competency, and has the teaching credential to make that work. And so when we're looking at HR and we're looking at hiring, we're constantly having to weave that lens into our hiring process to try and think, how do we get that candidate that can do all of these things in a tight labor market? Any questions? Conclusions. As I've said before, it's wonderful to see our students have access to a robust offerings at both high schools. That's really, really important to kind of keep focusing on. It's also imperative that we keep coming back to the amazing teachers that we have. I will also say that as we're nearing our Measure D completion date, it can never be said how lucky and fortunate both our students and our staff are with regard to having state-of-the-art facilities. We've spared nothing when we're talking about updating facilities and making sure that infrastructure is in place and machinery is in place and the best of technologies is in place for our students at both school sites. So kudos to everybody involved there. But when we're talking about pathway completion, we're seeing a very focused approach with regard to our students completing pathways at Morro Bay. We're seeing a focused approach perhaps at San Luis Obispo High School, where the students have a robust offering, but there is a measure of dabbling and how do we kind of define what's the best interest of the students, but also system-wise, is this a conversation about the ability to have linkage between the A and the B from a scheduling perspective? And then also it goes without saying how we weave in our junior highs and our middle schools. That's very, very important that we start to bring our middle schools into this conversation in a more robust way. The 4-year and the 6-year plan is imperative as we work our way toward having more students not only have access to CTE courses, but also completion of CTE courses. Relevancy. When we talk about relevancy, that's a universal with all of our offerings, whether that be in language arts or math. The student in our Youth Truth Survey will always come back to the idea of relevancy. How relevant and how linked what they're learning in class to the outside world. How do we make sure that what they're learning is relevant to the outside world? That's a challenge. In 2021 as a teacher, how do I make sure that my material and my content, my approach, make sure that the student is prepared for the world of work, for a job that has not even been created yet? So it's imperative that we're talking about skills-based, we're talking about language development, we're talking about soft skills. All of those pieces come into our career technical education field. Of course, we have to continue to build our partnerships. So Eve, you're absolutely right about the internship piece. It's imperative that we grow that internship piece. That's kind of the next iteration as well. How do we link with industry? And I go back to the I Innovate piece. All of it comes all the way from K through 12. It doesn't just, focus on ninth grade. It's really starting in our kinder and for getting students excited about that. So there's many people to celebrate on that. Any questions?
I'm going to go to the public, even though this is just a discussion item, and see if there are any questions from members of the public about what we've been talking about. Seeing no one.
Chris?
Yeah, oh, Mr. Buckman, I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's okay. So, thank you, as always.
You're welcome.
Make my head hurt a little bit, but it's good. We now have these just incredible CTE facilities. They're phenomenal. And some of our kids or some of the students they can't partake in everything, band, music. And I look at these things, and I'm going to just pick a number. From 3 o'clock on, the lights are off, the machines are off, and they're sitting there. Is there any potential that it would help our students if they were available, either to come share with their families or just come in on their own in the evening?
Well, yes. I love your thought process. I love where you're going with it. Also, from a board priority, we really want to recalibrate what the school day looks like from a perspective of perhaps providing not only enrichment opportunities to students. I love the idea of the family woven in there, but also how do we provide an extended learning opportunity for all students, regardless of the fact that the official end of the school day is 3:10. How do we provide that enriched or extended learning opportunity whilst also preserving the facility, while also not burning out our faculty? And so that's a delicate balance because, again, it's a tight labor market, especially in a career field, whether that be auto, wood, welding, architectural design, culinary, digital media. You have a limited supply of resources being the teacher, and you have probably a limitless demand for opportunity. But I commend you in that thought process. I think that's a puzzle piece that we as a district and as a cabinet team have talked about. And how do we weave in more opportunities for students in the afternoon or evening while the facility is there? But also, how do we weave that in even at the weekend? And so there's a lot of research out there that shows that you could create modules of learning maybe on a Friday evening and an all day on a Saturday. And maybe it's over a 3 or 4 week period. And what you're trying to do is you're trying to encourage, again, goes back to the middle school. You're trying to encourage those 6th, 7th, 8th graders to really have access to facilities that are state of the art, but also bring them into the conversation to explore. And I love what we're doing at the elementary sites with the I Innovate, but as we build out our facilities at the 2 high schools, we have the capability of bringing the students in even earlier. And if they're more comfortable in the high school setting in that field, you're going to pique their interest a lot earlier. The second nugget in that is how do we weave in courses that not only meet the A through G, but meet them in the subject matter competency, so it's not seen as something that's less than. If a student comes in the 9th grade or the 10th grade and says, oh my gosh, I do geometry through my construction program, that's a sweet spot to be in. And I've been in that construction field since my 7th grade. And I feel totally comfortable in it 7th, 8th, 9th, and I'm now in it for real, so to speak, in 10th grade. So you're really planting the seed. And I will say that sports have figured that out a long time ago.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Eve.
As far as the competencies of the student, can maybe one way to get them into paths and completing paths is to have that feedback from testing and career counselors, aptitude testing. These are your strengths. Why don't you go that way a little bit and see how you like it? And just have an extra pair of eyes from an adult in addition to parents, overseeing them and their teachers, of course. So yeah,
Absolutely.
career counselors.
Yeah, and I would say the following, and Mrs. Frost is sitting to my left, and the CCGI program and work of our counseling team, Shelley Benson comes to mind, working at the middle schools, and they are taking that exact piece of the puzzle. They're taking those kinds of assessments. Back in the day in high school, you would take the ASVAB assessment, but right now we're looking at 7th and 8th graders, and soon to be maybe even 6th graders, starting to create a roadmap for success. They're taking interest surveys. My own children took the interest surveys at Laguna, and they're trying to figure out what fields of interest they might have to, again, pique their interest. And then how do we nudge, encourage, cajole those interests in a meaningful way? But again, it comes back to not only the linkage, but it also speaks to what's our role? Is our role to give them a predetermined path, or is our role to give them the opportunity to explore?
Both, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think back to a presenter that came to San Luis Obispo High School from a university in Northern California called Stanford. And this presenter presented to all of our students and talked about the fact that at Stanford, they love the students to be able to dabble their freshman and sophomore years to really try and find themselves. And I won't name the student, but the student raised his hand and he said, "So why do you make it so difficult to get in?" And I thought it was really poignant because they don't encourage the dabbling. It's more prescriptive. It's like, you got to do this to get this. And that speaks to the social and emotional piece that we always talk about, how the students feel that they're constantly competing and they're trying this kind of constant death march towards something that is out there that they hope that will encourage them to be able to be successful. But we all know that it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be successful. They want to be happy before they need to be successful.
And speaking of equity, often that competition works against equity because of some different economic strata in society. The higher ones are more competitive, and if you come from a lower economic level, then you may have less know how to compete less than.
I agree with you. Not only will they struggle maybe in the competition piece, but they probably struggle from a lack of confidence, just being able to how to navigate it. So I agree with
that
you.
would be part of that for sure.
Eve, or excuse me, Evelyn. I apologize.
One of the things that, as you were talking, Mr. O'Connor, that brought to mind, and when Ms. Dobler-Drew was talking about aptitude tests, I was thinking that, we have this rich source of student, a collective body, such as the Student Senate and Youth Truth Survey. And I'm wondering if there is some way, because, I was thinking for some of those aptitude tests, sometimes that's dependent on exposure within the home or kind of that reflection and self-talk. But is there a way that, we can tap into those resources where, where kids can tell us some of those things that interest them, and also they're hearing and building, they're hearing what other students are saying, and that piques their interest, that kind of collective, and that exposure to the I Innovate, the kind of nexus of Student Senate, Youth Truth Survey, the I Innovate, and I think there was something else I was going to say, those industry leaders that kind of pop in on us. But it just brought to mind that for some of our students, sometimes those aptitude tests, they don't really see themselves as of yet. So it's just another way of, or an idea that I was thinking about. But anyway, this is really interesting, and I love that idea of the double dipping. And also, when you're giving this information to us, you have really, it's almost like you're looking at it in a very sculptural way. You're looking at it from very different points of view that really helps us develop a more comprehensive plan. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, so going along with Mrs. Frame's idea too, I wonder if there can be a peer support group that she was sort of pointing towards, that peer support, so that they don't get into those classes and feel there's nobody in there that looks like me. I don't have any friends in here, and maybe get some peer support to get into the pathway and have fun with each other on the pathway.
I agree. And a phrase that always comes to mind is, you cannot be what you cannot see. And I think that students have the ability to shut down very, very quickly if we don't help support them project and to visualize where they could go and what they will be. And Evelyn, to your point, I think one of the pieces of the puzzle is in the classroom itself, when the teachers just take that moment to link what they're doing in the room with where it could become really useful in the world of work. And we have some work to do from a district perspective on creating meaningful professional development to help teachers take not only that time, but also give them almost like sentence starters of how they can link what they're doing in the classroom to what's going on in the world of work. And I think about, I was at Morro Bay High School and I was in Steve Gady's class for his pathway with regard to with the chemistry and the biology and everything he was working on. And the students were able to navigate and talk to me about when they were looking at the DNA analysis, how and what industries would they be using this in? And they were talking about criminal investigation as one area. They were talking about COVID, and they were talking about screening, and we talked about GMOs. And we started to have this pretty in-depth conversation because they were linking what they were doing in the classroom with a field of work, as opposed to maybe in a traditional biology or chemistry class where they're maybe focused more on the book itself as opposed to linking. And that's what we're finding as well from our youth truth survey with regard to the student feedback, the relevancy, but how do we know more about career technical education and how do we apply what we're learning in the room to what industries are actually thinking and talking about?
Well, then it's always exciting. I know that business people are going to be invited to come in and work with the kids too. So that's going to bring another, and them going out and working on site if insurance. I'm sure that can happen. It's happening in other districts where the kids can actually go off site and work too.
Agreed.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Well, thank you, Mr. O'Connor. As you know, your presentations are always really interesting and spur a lot of questions and comments, and I think we're all quite interested in that, which brings us to 10.03, the A to G profile update. So,
okay, let me see if I can find that.
Let's see if we can keep this under an hour and a half, Leslie.
I apologize.
No, you should, the truth is you should not apologize because the board is really engaged in what you're talking about. And so this is really important stuff. And the fact that we've had so many questions for you, I think really indicates the relevance to the board of these conversations and these topics.
Oh, thank you. I'm hoping that I'm sharing right now. Am I sharing, Mandy? I apologize. Don't see the share icon here. Thank you. I will tell you upfront that Mr. Simon, myself, and Mr. Weinschenk, we used to call ourselves the Luddites at San Luis Obispo High School. So if you know the historical reference, then you'll not need anything else after that. So I will try and keep this a little bit shorter than the previous presentation, but please feel free to ask questions. So we're looking at A through G completion rates for the two comprehensive high schools specifically. And when we talk about A through G, it's important to kind of just frame what does that mean exactly. We're talking about students having the ability to have access to a four-year university, whether that be the CSU or the UC. And that the A through G requirements are determined by obviously the institutions themselves and by and what we're looking at here is we're talking about history, social science, a minimum of 2 years. English, we're talking about 4 years. Mathematics, 3 years. Lab science, 2 years. Language other than English, a minimum of 2 years. We're talking about visual and performing arts, at least a year, and college prep electives, at least a year. And I want to reference the fact that in some instances, these are required, and they actually ask for additional years that are recommended. So it's something to remember and to think about. When we break down specifically the courses that you have to think about within that A through G component, in history or social science, you're talking about world history, US history, you're talking about government. In English, obviously, you're talking about 9th grade English, 10th grade English, 11th and 12th. Mathematics, traditionally, you're talking about algebra, geometry, and algebra 2. Lab science, you're talking about life science, you're talking about biology. Physical science, you're talking about chemistry or physics. Language other than English In our district, you have Spanish, you have American Sign Language, you have Latin, you have French, and visual and performing arts. We're blessed in our district with a plethora of offerings in our visual and performing arts, whether that be dance or theater, music, band, digital media, art. You can start to fill in the blanks there. In our college prep electives, many of those are our A through G approved CTE courses. They'll make up our college prep electives. I will also point out that economics is in there in an A through G college prep elective when we're looking at the G elective. Okay. Any questions so far?
I'm sorry, I've got to get this started, but I do have a question. On the lab science, you mentioned that the primary lab sciences are chemistry and physics. What about a student like me, for example, who was not a great math guy? I know I would have failed chemistry and I would have certainly failed physics. What alternatives do we offer for students?
That's a really good question. In our progression in next generation science standards in the district, as a graduation requirement, all students take biology or ag biology their freshman year, and then they progress to chemistry their sophomore year or ag chemistry. Chris, you bring up a really fascinating point. When we made the decision for next generation science standards to move chemistry to the sophomore year, one of the areas that we were really concerned about was the fact that students struggle in chemistry if they have not been enrolled or concurrently enrolled in Algebra 2. There's a struggle there for students who are in their sophomore year who have not had exposure to Algebra 2. And we're talking about specific standards within Algebra 2 that kind of bridge and cross over into chemistry. So your point is very, very valid. We'll have students who will struggle mightily in chemistry their sophomore year due to their math competency. And as we push further into this discussion about why are some students not able to meet their A through G, that's actually one of the reasons. Chemistry is a real stumbling block, especially in their sophomore year. Also, to compound it, algebra, especially Algebra 2. And it's a struggle for many students in those fields. And it's ironic you brought that up.
Yeah, Eve has her hand up.
Eve.
So for the sake of equity, can more tutoring in math take place?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, it goes back to the opportunity to have extended day opportunities, have an enrichment opportunity available to all students. I also say that our teachers, specifically in math, and all teachers in our schools are always available to help students. They make themselves available before school, after school, at lunchtime. But also, we talk a lot about the best first instruction. And I think that's really, really important in that math piece, developing that relationship with the student, but also really focusing on the best first instruction. And then policies or practices that make math accessible. I don't want to get into conversation specifically about math, but how do we make math accessible to students? For example, a program and a policy we instituted at San Luis Obispo High School 3 years ago was we did not have a homework policy, and our students loved it. And they loved it because when a student's in Algebra 1, Geometry, or Algebra 2, being sent home to work on math problems 1 through 47 odd, and they're struggling themselves to understand the concept, and there's point value, they're falling behind almost. And Eve, you've mentioned this several times, the equity piece. They may not have a parent at home who can help them with that math. They may not have access to a tutor, but others may. And so that really is, and it's not because of equity, but it's because homework as a conversation could be independent practice, and we're sending the students home to just practice without fear of punishment from a grade perspective. But that's just an aside. Okay. Here we've shown a 3-year comparison of A through G completion rate with regard to the graduating class. We talked about this a little bit in the previous presentation with regard to the CTE pathway, but I point out again that we've seen near 70% A through G completion with each graduating class at San Luis Obispo High School over the last 3 years. And we've seen close to 60% completion at Morro Bay High School. And this is the graduating class of 2021, 20, and 19. And again, we're just looking at all students in that field. Any questions on that particular slide? So then what we wanted to do is we wanted to break this down, and it's very subtle, but I wanted to just present, much like I had in the AP data, I wanted to look at the A through G completers, and I wanted to break the A through G completers down by gender. So if you remember, we had approximately, I think it was 111 A through G completers, I believe, at Morro Bay High last year. And we had 194 graduates, and we talk about that 58%. So of that, where are they falling gender-wise? And you can see a 3-year trend where we're seeing at Morro Bay High School and at San Luis Obispo High School, female students are completing their A through G a greater propensity than males, which would follow along with what we talked about in our last presentation with regard to AP data. What we noticed there was that our AP students predominantly were made up of female students, and more female students were taking the advanced placement exams and being successful in them. Here we're seeing the same kind of pattern, and it causes us then to be able to ponder and think what could be systems or strategies that we could employ to tackle this. So again, this is a data piece with regard to the percentage of students who were the completers, and then we just broke it down by gender.
But we also know that this follows through the college enrollment as well.
100%.
There's a significant, I don't know if it's a significant, but a majority of college students now are women.
I don't have this statistic, but I'm going to just give you a frame for it. Go back to the CTE piece, go back to the CTE enrollment piece and the CTE completion piece, and dollars to donuts, that if we broke it down by gender, we would see disproportionate male versus female within the CTE piece.
Interesting.
There you go. The next slide, again, I really wanted to focus on the the A through G completer. So I'm really just focused on those students who were the A through G completer from the graduating class. And I wanted to just break it down very simply into ethnicity. And I don't mean to dismiss other ethnic groups within this data piece. I was just merely looking at white versus Hispanic. And you can see the disproportionality with regard to the percentage of students who are Hispanic completing A through G versus white. And again, that speaks volumes to the work that we're doing in MTSS. We're working all the way from grade 1 kindergarten, and we're talking about systematic change throughout our middle schools and all the way into our high schools. And how are we building in systems of support and encouragement? And that goes back to maybe some of those barriers that we need to start to talk about. It comes back to the conversation around equity and access for all of our students. Took a little different bent on this particular slide, and I wanted to point it out. Here on the left-hand side, as I look at it, we're looking at the percentage of non-SED graduates, okay? So we're talking about the graduates here. The students who in the senior class identified as non-socioeconomically disadvantaged, and what percentage of that group met their A through G at the 2 high schools? And we see of that group, the students who identified as non-SED, at San Luis High, 75% of that group met their A through G requirements, and Morro Bay, 64%. So in both instances, just last year as an example, they both scored or met their requirements at a greater rate than the all, if that makes sense. Okay. And on the right-hand side, I wanted to see what did it look like for the percentage of students who identified as SED. And of that group, how many or what percentage of the SED students who met graduation, how much or how many of them met the requirement for A through G? And again, we're seeing at about 41 and 44% respectively. So there's a sizable difference between students who identify as non-SED making A through G in comparison to percentage-wise, those students who identify as SED. So we still have considerable work to do to close not only that achievement gap, but that success measurement of college entrance ability. Catherine?
I just want to speculate with you about whether some of this is the Mrs. Avery effect, which is the person who's willing to go out into the hallway and say, hey, you should be in this classroom. And so the more we pull those kids in, the more those kids, that people haven't been expecting or telling their whole lives they'll be going to college, will soon believe that they will go to college.
I agree with you wholeheartedly there. I think that's, if we call it the Avery effect throughout all of our middle school and high school, but I would also suggest that we have to really take a hard look at the barriers that have been created within the system to allow the students to be successful, and what methods are we putting in and what systems are we putting in to encourage and to make sure that they overcome the hurdle. And I go back to a student that might come in struggling in math, and we know that they have to take algebra course and they have to get a C or better. And if a student gets a D in one of those courses, math specific algebra their freshman year, they're immediately off track for A through G. And if they get a D in biology or ag biology, they're doubly off track. And they're still on track to graduate, and they're a wonderful student, and they're really participating, and they're heavily involved in school. But there's 2 courses already. It may only be 1 semester or 1 trimester course, but they're already A through G deficient. And they go into their 10th grade year, and they're trying, and they're really connected. But if they get 1 more D, now they got 3 classes. And that's a mountain to overcome. And you say to yourself, well, is there a way for them to overcome that in summer school? And then you think to yourself, well, that student maybe wants to have a job, or they want to have some other kind of experience, or maybe they have to have a job and they haven't got the ability. So that's the reflection piece where we really have to think through, because the telling statistic here is our students who identify as non-SED are completing A through G at a higher percentage than the all. They're doing really well. And the students who are SED are at about 40-something%, which is below in both schools all, if that makes sense. So we do have a ways to work there, but also the connectiveness to school. How do we connect students to school? How do we make them feel comfortable with the learning process? And then most importantly, how do we bring the families into the conversation? Because that oftentimes is overlooked. We need to really work to make sure that the families not only understand the system, they need to be up to speed with what A through G means and the importance of and the significance of. And that work goes right back into the middle schools, right back into the 6-year plan, right back into 6th grade, 5th grade. It's never too early, but in a measured way, because we have to balance out the social and emotional piece. A student in 4th and 5th grade may feel overwhelmed if somebody comes in like me who starts talking about A through G, and they're like, wow. So we have to be very intentional about how we talk about it, but it is important to start to talk about. Here again, I wanted to have a control group, and I looked at the percentage of students RFEP classified or redesignated fluent English proficient students. And then we wanted to also look at our EL students. And again, I was looking at the percent of students who were those designated RFEP as graduates and what percentage of them met the A through G requirement. And on the right-hand side, the percent of students who were EL graduates by the senior year, they were still classified as an EL student, and what percentage of that met A through G. I will tell you that on the far right with the EL piece, we're talking at San Luis Obispo High School, we're talking 1 EL student of 8 EL students. So 1 of 8. So we have 8 students last year's graduating class at San Luis Obispo High School who were still categorized or designated as EL. Now that might have been a student who may have been a newcomer, but it also might be a student who was a long-term English student, or we sometimes refer to as LTEL as an acronym. So if a student that was maybe a newcomer to the school system that might be designated EL, or a student who's been in the school system in the US, maybe their whole life, and more importantly, they may have been in San Luis Coastal their whole life. So why do we have this long-term EL situation? And then what percentage of that student body is meeting their A through G? In this example, 1 of 8, which was 13%. At Morro Bay High, there was 9 EL students, and 3 met EL. As an EL classification, 3 met the A through G requirement, or 33%. And I think it's important to go into that level of detail because every student deserves that narrative, and every student deserves that kind of analysis, because that's how we will up our game to make it possible for more students to have that A through G experience. Here we're looking at students with disabilities. Again, those students in our school system who were classified as students with disabilities in their senior year, and what percentage of that group were able to meet A through G. And we're talking here about single digits, low single digits last year senior class. And the why. Why did this take place? And more importantly, what can we do about it? And what can we learn about? And we talk about co-teaching, and we bring students into co-teaching experiences that are in courses that are A through G approved. But we also have students in this field of students with disability in classes that aren't A through G approved. And we have to recognize that. And a lot of that can be determined and predetermined by the IEP process. So again, when we talked about the CTE presentation, we talked about linkage. and we talk about making kind of hypothesis about why, we really have to delve pretty deep into understanding the complexity of why we get these data points as we look at progression through high school. Question, Mark?
Yeah, thanks. So you brought it up before, and it's been brought up at the board. In situations like this, where we have students that are excelling and students that aren't, and we look at the concept of tutoring, is there something out there that allows students to get credit for that? So I need a math class, or to make up a math class. If I go work with somebody that's having more trouble than I'm having, I know from personal experience, and I've watched others, where the tutoring, I learned more about journalism and being a writer when I was teaching it than 20 years of practicing it.
Yeah, it's yes. The short answer is yes, but you have to come back to the availability of the student, the willingness of the student who wants to be the tutor, and the availability of the student who wants to be the tutor to be able to go and tutor. Second complexity is, what's that course called? Is it an A through G approved course? And how do we weave that into their course load, and at what cost? So when I say cost, not a financial cost in any way, but I'm talking more about the student piece. Go back to the CTE piece. I really would love to tutor, but I'd love to take that Auto 1 class that's offered fourth period. I have a choice. And there's a systematic need in that algebra class to have those 6 students who are in Calc BC go into the algebra class and help tutor. How do we nudge, cajole? How do we encourage that to take place? So it's something to think about. But Mark, I appreciate the feedback, because that's one of the things that we're wrestling with as well. Then finally, just conclusions. I mean, what are we seeing from the data? And I want to give a shout out again to Morro Bay, because Morro Bay has worked tirelessly over the last 3 to 5 years of really closing that gap between some of their significant subgroups and the all. I also like to commend Morro Bay and San Luis High for continually maintaining and continuing to grow their A3G completion. I want to say that when you say as a school that you've got an A3G completion of near 60 or near 70, that's really, really something. It's important to celebrate that, because a lot of schools and a lot of districts would love to have that as a data point. We have that data point consistently, but we still have work to do. And we have to do work all the way through to our middle schools for people to understand the complexity of that. My last point is this: I meet with the middle school principals. I provide for them data point at 9th grade, a list of the 9th grade students by significant subgroup and why they've fallen off the A3G train already. Because the DNA pattern still exists in 7th and 8th grade. What are we seeing trend and pattern wise, and why? They're unsuccessful with maybe a D in algebra. They're not able to access biology because of the academic language and the academic content. Maybe it's chemistry, maybe it's the algebra 2 piece, but we're seeing definite data points where students need to be, and teachers and admin, even into the middle schools, need to be aware of how do we set students up for success when they enter high school, where they're on the clock, so to speak. It's high stakes in that there's a measurement, there's a transcript, there's an A through G, there's a CTE completion. It's kind of like you're stepping up to the major league, so to speak, and we need to improve that communication and articulation. Evelyn.
So in line with what you're saying, middle school, do we need to back it up even further?
Yes, especially into 6th grade, but in a way that is well thought through.
Yeah, no.
But yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, in support of that idea, yeah, in 6th grade, they're so excited to get out of elementary school, and they would be really focused on what they want to do. But once they get into junior high or middle school, the distractions are so great. I think they can lose their way more. So yeah, along with that idea, starting it early, get that set in, not stone, but get them on a thinking about being goal directed. And then when they get to the distractions of middle school, they'll at least have that behind piece set in place.
Agreed.
Okay, well, is there anyone from the public who would like to address the board on this item? Again, this is not an action item. We're seeing no one. Thank you very much again, Mr. O'Connor. It's great.
You're very welcome.
Great
Thank you, guys.
stuff.
Thank you.
Thank
Good night.
Thank
Thank you, Leslie.
Thank you.
So we have item 10.04, which is an action item. This is the ESSER 3 plan approval. And Mr. Pinkerton?
Yeah, I'm just pulling it up really quick so I could share it with the board. Manny, can we pull it up or no? Okay. Trying to pull up this.
Oh.
Yep, thank you. So yeah, this is something that we brought to the board on a few different occasions. And so going back again, just kind of big picture, the board, tons of input, throughout last year with COVID, how we were going to deal with it, what we were going to do to help kids make these learning gains. So the board passed the LCAP, the board passed the expanded learning opportunities grant. And so this is another plan that we have to put forward called the ESSER 3 plan. So it's more federal funds, really meant to help us get through COVID. So in particular, the board heard a presentation today about MTSS, Laura Storm's presentation. And so these funds are predominantly dedicated toward that focus, which is really to do whatever we can over the next few years, utilizing these funds to bring students back to a level where they should be. So make those learning gains, right, over that time. So I'm just really quick to go through the plan itself. Again, some aspects of this federal plan with federal funds. You have to show that you have our COVID prevention plan, that we have our COVID safety plan, that they've been put online. We have our expanded learning opportunities grant plan. And this, of course, is the ESSER 3 plan. So just a quick kind of focus on where these funds are being allocated. Number one is strategies for continuous and safe in-person learning. We know that bringing students back on campus is a huge asset, right? And it's our best way of really making those learning recoveries. And then also key is really making up that lost instructional time that we talked about. So there's a few sections about the input that we've taken, but I really want to jump down to, how are the dollars really going to be spent? And so again, looking at this first, continuous safe in-person learning. So in order to ensure that our students are able to come back to campus and that we're keeping track of testing and ensuring that students have whatever they need and staff has what they need to be safe. We envision our contract with our workplace invention or our workplace infection coordinator continuing. I would love for COVID to go away and not have to have these dollars put that way. But until we're in a place where we don't have to worry about testing and COVID and kind of the impact on classrooms, I think this is money well spent. I know Holly Warwick, Resolute, in that position is instrumental in the lives of our principals and our secretaries at our school sites. What she is able to do and we don't put that on our principals and we don't put that on our secretaries or our staff is really helpful because it's bad enough, right? Dealing with all of the other aspects. So definitely money that is helpful there. Of course, continuing having masks, cleaning supplies, there's money set aside for that over the next 3 years. Technology and furniture. So these are things that as we, as students have to be off of campus, if they're quarantined, making sure that we have those hotspots, those MiFis available for students are critical. So there's some funds put aside for that. Realize there's $4.5 million of LCAP funds put aside for these purposes. There is another $5 million in expanded learning opportunities put towards this. This is another $5 million towards, these same goals as well. So when we look at this, it's things that the board has heard before. It's the same things. My goal is to take all of those pots of money and try to keep these interventions in place for multiple years, because we know it's going to take more than 1 year to make the learning recovery that we need to do. And so that's kind of my purpose and how I focused, setting these budgets up. So then in terms of the impact of lost instructional time, we have added 2 things since the last board meeting. And that is the science camp funding that the board approved at a previous board meeting, as well as our teacher MOU. And so that is the work, teachers have a lot of extra work because of students being quarantined. We want to ensure that kids are getting the instruction that they need. So by paying a little extra to our staff for putting those packets and work together and meeting with kids, maybe after school or before school, or even during the day, to check in with them to see how they're doing. If they are quarantining, those are important things that we need to have in place. So that's goal 1 with extending instructional learning time. Goal 2 is really that what Laura talked about today. That multiple tier 2 system of support. So you saw firsthand teachers meeting individually with kids, small group instruction, ELA and math. I'm trying to meet kids where they are. And all of this has to be tied to assessment data. So that's one of the things that the federal government asks is that, hey, if you're going to put money forward, you're going to do these things, they want to see the data to back it up. And so it's nice to have FastBridge and these other things that we're doing multiple times over the course of the year to ensure that we have that data available. So this is helping pay for, again, the academic intervention teachers, which the board is used to LLI teachers. We also have a lot of instructional aids put in place to assist English learner teachers, English learner aides. Now, the next one, it seems like, only $300,000 for integrated student support access to address, student barriers to learning, which is where the mental health piece, emotional concerns. But again, this is just one pot of money. So there's a lot of money that's set aside in the LCAP for that same purpose, a lot of money that's set aside for in the expanded learning opportunities grant. So all of those things are helping to fund those, socioeconomic, the needs, the needs and barriers that our kids are having to face. So there's some funds in that, again, to really work to pay for the marriage and family therapists, counselors on special assignment. Now all of our elementary counselors, our high school counselors, our middle school counselors. So it's a lot of those paid through LCAP. A ton of the work that they're doing this year in terms of summer training and push into the classroom, all of that is in our LCAP. So along with all of the things I just said, both of these plans, both expanded learning plan as well as this ESHA 3 plan, is something that I'm going to be bringing back to you every 6 months. Where are we at? Do we need to shift some funds? Do we need to move in one area or another? So this is an ongoing conversation that we will be having over the next 2 to 3 years, is what I would tell you. So the LCAP is a 3-year plan, but the board revisits that plan every year, looks at everything in it, how it's funded, how it's working. And so all of the things that we've talked about today, and really we're going to have to prioritize as a district, as a board, the things that are really making the most impact on kids, I would say after that 3-year period, as we really, narrow in and focus on what's most important. So this today is kind of just putting money in big budget categories, but it will be something that is a living document that we will continue to look at along with our entire budget over the next 3 years.
Okay, is there anyone from the public who would like to address the board on this item? Okay, seeing no one, I'll bring it back to the board. Are there questions from the board, or would someone like to make a motion or both? Mr. Buckman.
I'll make a motion to approve the plan that was so elegantly presented.
I have a motion by Mr. Buckman, second by Dr. Isabel Rodgers. Is there any further discussion? Okay, seeing none. Mr. Buckman.
Yes.
Dr. Isabel Rodgers.
Yes.
Mrs. Sheffer. Mrs. Roger.
Yes.
Ms. Dobler-Drew. Mrs. Frame. And I'm a yes. The motion to approve the ESSER 3 plan passes 7-0.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ryan. Thanks for all the work. And one of the things I think I and the board appreciate is your long-range view of making this money last as long as possible in ways that are going to benefit our students. So thank you for that thoughtfulness. 10.05, we have a first reading, proposed revisions to board policy 1312.3, uniform complaint procedures. Mrs. Frost.
Thank you very much. Again, uniform complaint procedures. This is a mandatory update, clarifies the areas in which the UCP should be utilized and the areas where a district should guide a parent in another way. I'm hoping for this to come back for a second reading at our next meeting.
Yeah. Is there any objection to it coming back for second reading? Is there anyone from the public that would like to address us on this one? Okay. 10.06, proposed revisions to board policy 5141.31, immunizations. First reading, Mrs. Frost.
Yes, thank you again. Immunizations. This again is a mandatory update, among other things. It does require immunization records upon enrollment in school, when somebody transfers to school, going into 7th grade, and does address vaccination clinics on campuses and really the expertise that the person running the clinic must have.
Is there anyone from the public that would like to address the board on this? Okay, is there any board member? Everybody good with bringing it back for a second reading? Okay, looks good for that. 10.07, proposed revisions to board policy 5148.3, preschool early learning, early childhood education. Again, a first reading.
Very good. This is an optional policy, but given that we have a preschool in our district, important for us to have guidance here. Talks about collaboration with community preschools, priority given to at-risk students. And again, I'd recommend this comes back for a second reading.
Okay, is there anyone from the public to address the board on this item? Okay, seeing no one, everybody okay with this coming back? Any comments? Okay. 10.08, proposed revisions to board policy 6146.2, certificate of proficiency, high school equivalency. First reading.
Thank you. Again, a mandatory update. And you really explained it. It's for certificate of completion and the high school equivalency for our students who are 16 or older in the first, or older than 18 for the high school equivalency. And again, I'd have this come back for a second reading.
Okay. Mrs. Dawson, anyone from the public? Okay, bring it back to the board. Any comments from board members? Okay, to bring it back for a second reading, everyone? Okay, we'll bring that back for a second reading. And then 10.09, delete board policy 6157, distance learning.
Yeah,
First reading of a deletion.
Exactly. So this is a deletion per CSBA, and it's due to the expiration of the emergency legislation that allowed distance learning. So the CSBA is requiring, or at least suggesting, that we delete the board policy. And again, I'd bring this back for a second reading.
Okay. Anyone from the public? Okay, any board comments? Bring it back for a second reading. Thank you very much. Move on to the action consent agenda. Again, as always, let me know if you'd like something pulled. 10.01, approval of minutes, September 21st. 11.02, acceptance of donations. 11 point, hold on here, Catherine. 11.03, approval of warrants and payroll. 11.04, hold on, just 11.05, approval of furniture and equipment requests. 11.06, approval of certificated and classified personnel items. 11.07, approval of a voting member, representative, and designated proxy for the San Luis Obispo County Adult Education Consortium. And 11.08, approve quarterly report on uniform complaint filings, and this is the Williams settlement. Okay. Would someone like to make a motion for 11.01 through 11? Let's see, was it acceptance of donations you guys wanted, Paul? Okay, I'm sorry, 11.02, sorry. Someone like to make a motion for 11.01 and 11.03 to 11.08?
So moved.
Okay, the motion by Mrs. Roger, second by Mrs. Sheffer. Is there anyone from the public who would like to address us on consent agenda? Seeing no one. Mr. Buckman? Yeah. Mrs. Dobler-Drew? Dr. Eisendrath Rogers?
Yes.
Mrs. Frame? Mrs. Roger?
Yes.
Mrs. Sheffer? And I'm a yes. Motion carries 7-0. Dr. Eisendrath Rogers, you asked for 11.02 to be pulled?
Yes, please. I just wanted to acknowledge Mr. Buckman for his generous donation of a Nikon camera and lenses, because it makes me think about when I had an opportunity to get a cheap camera as a kid. But I think this, someone who has talent that go behind the camera can make a difference. We could have another Richard Avedon or some other fashion designer, photographer who may come of this. So I just wanted to thank you for that, Mark.
Thank you. Okay, we have a motion. Would you like to make that as a motion?
Oh, sure.
Okay, we have a motion by Dr. Eisendrath Rogers, second by Mrs. Roger. Is there anybody from the public to address the board on this item? No? Okay. Dr. Eisendrath Rogers?
Aye.
Mrs. Roger? Mrs. Sheffer? Mr. Buckman? Ms. Dobler-Drew? Mrs. Frame? And I'm a yes. Motion carries 7-0. Item 12.02, advanced agenda. Mrs. Dobler-Drew, it's getting late for me.
It's late for everybody.
Yes.
So I'll try to be brief about it. I'm bringing back the original proposal to look into human trafficking and then see whether it was an appropriate program for our district. And Dr. Prater did a great research on that, and he found it was a big priority in the county and is very hidden. Also, that we have a mandate from the state, the AB 1227, to make sure that it would, that the health education would include human trafficking, or, yeah. And the bill would impose a state mandated local program. So we were looking into whether the present programs in the district are adequately meeting the needs of this bill. And I know there's still some conversation is ongoing. I know Mrs. Frost is involved and Mr. O'Connor and to some extent, Mr. Mayfield, with whom I've been having some conversations. And as I looked into the materials we're using, and there's certainly a lot adequately covering avoiding disease and what to do, if your ongoing sexual activity leads to pregnancy or disease and so forth. But there's not that much to do with human trafficking, although Mr. Mayfield brought up there might be some supplemental materials being used in this regard, but I just don't know what they are yet, and I didn't see them in the materials that I had at home that I was looking at for, like this one, for example. And that's a workbook, but I also have the big textbook. I was looking through there, and it didn't seem like that so far that we were covering the human trafficking mandate. So to that regard, I called up the Protect program and spoke to a lady there, and I asked about funding, about money, how much it would cost, and about how much time it would take. And she said, where's my paper? Oh yeah, that it would be zero cost for a year, that we could have it for a whole year for no cost. And then after that, there would be some costs, but you can get further funding too from the CSEC or through social services grants. We are a rural county, so that's why we get it zero cost for a year. And as far as the time, the initial training for a teacher would be 2 hours, and then about an hour for the teacher to go through all the materials and learn the curriculum. And then get this, only 2 lessons per year, 45-minute lessons, which would be used then to incorporate into and be reminded of and, used in other areas. So there would be a cross-curricular, reference point to this. But the thing is that this could help our kids to develop, especially the most vulnerable, could help them to develop a way to detect if somebody's a predator and to know who's safe and who's not safe. And things like that could even save us money through preventing further legal actions if somebody gets into an unsafe situation. And it's not just, this has nothing to do with domestic abuse or whether they're getting mistreated by their parents or anything. This has to do with commercial, predatory things, from stranger to young person. So the question is, would the board be open to putting this on the agenda for a future board meeting?
So that is the question. One thing I'm wondering, it seems as if what you're saying is we already use the PROTECT program, which seems to be, which is the program that the district has approved, and it seems to be fulfilling the requirements that we need to have fulfilled. Is there, I'm curious from what Mrs. Dobler-Drew said about additional human trafficking information. And I guess what I'm wondering is, what are we doing about that? What are we doing about that now? And is that something that the district would like to know, that the district hasn't, not an obligation exactly, but that the district has?
I thought it was.
Yeah, well, but I understand that, but it sounds like we're already making our mandates. But is there more? I guess the question for me, is there more that we're doing within the PROTECT program that we could be doing?
Well, I assume you're going to ask somebody over there, but I just want to say,
that's what I'm doing.
I just want to say that I wasn't aware that we were using the PROTECT program, but we are. Would you be able to say more about that?
Well, I believe we are using the PROTECT program, are we not?
Yes,
she said
yes. We did some research with Rick Mayfield and with Leslie O'Connor, and they assure us that we are using the PROTECT program. That those are the lessons that we've adopted, and that our teachers are modifying those for use in the classroom, bringing them to their high school and middle school students.
I see.
Yeah, in the
Nobody
middle
mentioned
school,
it.
in the middle school program, we have from the PROTECT program, we have
Good.
in 7th grade per AB 1227, we adopted the PROTECT program. The curriculum in particular is called Protecting a Masterpiece. This lesson builds upon the concept of the inner voice, introducing the establishment of boundaries through words, body language, time, and physical space. It includes emotional pauses and an emphasis on responding to gut feelings. The second part of that is students are taught about the many forms that child abuse can take: physical, emotional, sexual, neglect, and that there are also different types of human trafficking, such as forced labor or commercial sexual exploitation. So that is Protecting a Masterpiece.
And that's in 7th grade.
That's in 7th grade with our students. And then the at Los Osos, it's taught in PE class, and at Laguna, it's taught in the elective wheel. In high school, we also have adopted from the PROTECT program, and students are required to take 1 trimester or semester of health course during the school year or over the summer. The high school curriculum about human trafficking is also adopted from Protect. Health teachers are also use the positive prevention plus curriculum in their sexual health unit to discuss sex trafficking and labor trafficking as forms of human trafficking. The PPP lesson is an optional lesson extension within the relationship and abuse unit. And this particular Protect unit in high school is provided on the Protect website, and it's called Understand and Recognize Human Trafficking. And this one is this lesson expands on the subject of human trafficking to address preventative factors such as what personal information is and not safe to share online. And then the second part is students learn in depth about warning signs, the role of social media and gaming in recruitment, signs of grooming, and how media can influence exploitation. Now, to get to your question though, Mr. Unger, is can we do more? Absolutely. I mean, the Protect program goes deep and there's lots of it. We have health in our school district because of the dangers in society these days. Health has become an amalgam of what we're worried about. Vaping has been added. Smoking has been added. Sexually transmitted diseases is part of that health curriculum, and now that's been put in there. So this is a piece. It's certainly not all that we could do, but it's a pretty limited space that we have dedicated to this. And I think we've done a lot over the last couple of years since 2018 to address this. Now, we did participate, our staff did participate with the Human Trafficking Task Force. We did meet with county leadership on this. It's all in the report I put together. I feel just like I do with many things, I feel like we've done what we need to do to address the law. But as with many things, is it enough? And that is absolutely an important question. I believe we could dive in and do more, but my question would be, my question to that would be yes, that would be good. However, what else would need to go? Because there's only so much time we have, and our health teachers do a bang up job. There's a lot they cover, and I think they do a really good job. If you've ever gone into a health class, you'll know what I'm talking about. They do an outstanding job. It's delicate. The topics are delicate, and I believe they do a really good job. I believe we could probably enhance what we do at the middle level, where kids are at that adolescent phase, and it's always good to kind of bring them up. Much of the health curriculum that we cover in middle school is about really protecting yourself from drugs, alcohol, things that young kids, adolescent kids can fall off the tracks on. And in high school, it's really imperative that kids have this, I think, because they're most, I think, vulnerable at that age to human trafficking. So those are my thoughts. And I respect the fact that you're looking at this. I really do. I just know we have, 7% of our EL learners that are some of our schools that are struggling to be at grade level. And that's where a lot of our focus is right now. And we just have a lot going on at all of our schools. We have great priorities the board has set. And I just think we have to be very mindful of where we put our energy and our time. And I think our system is teetering on, our people are tired and we're working hard. And this would just be one more thing that we could look at. Perhaps this is something we could revisit once we stabilize from COVID and kind of get ourselves over that hump, and we could relook at it perhaps next year. And that would be something that might make better sense to me. That would be my thought at this point, but certainly it's your call.
Well, so it comes back. Thank you for that long explanation. I was afraid at some point we might be going a little over the line on advanced agenda. So given what Dr. Prater just said, I need to look at the board and I need to say, does the board want more information? Do we need to agendize this item? And is that something the board has an interest in doing right now? So I need to know from board members.
Can I make one comment?
Of
I
course.
wasn't aware from this, from what you presented, Dr. Prater, that it was being utilized. It looked like that district administrators had attended, but I didn't see where it said it was being applied. So that's what I missed in the program.
Yeah, if you look on, I believe it's on page 3. You should see it on page 3. It's after what the administrators, so page 2 covers what we have done with our administrative group and covered with our principals and staff. And then on page 3, we talk about the middle school curriculum and the implementation, as well as the high school part.
I'm sorry. Yes, I see the word implementation now. I just didn't realize. I thought that meant it could be implemented. I just didn't realize it was ongoing. So you've met the concerns of the mandate.
Yes.
For 7th and 9th or 11th, whatever grade it is.
Correct.
But just for future reference, the lady said they have a K-3 program, a 5th, 7th, 9th, and 11th program.
Yeah, I got on their website when I was doing this. It's impressive. It's a robust organization, and it's worth looking at more closely down the road.
So I need to again bring it back to the board. Thank you for bringing this subject up. Mrs. Frame, do you feel like you have enough information, or do you want this as an agenda item?
Given what Dr. Prater said, that we are currently meeting the demand and all that is going on in our district, and I just get a sense when I'm going to sites and just seeing teachers really working hard and administrators that no at this time.
Okay, Mr. Buckman?
No.
Dr. Isabel Rodgers? Mrs. Sheffer?
I'm fine. No,
Mrs.
I
Rodgers?
don't need it brought back.
Ms. Dobler, again, thank you for bringing this up. Are you okay with?
I'm okay too. I'm glad to learn that it has been implemented. I thought it meant potential implementation. I just didn't get that we were already doing it.
Great. Okay, well, thank you. I think Dr. Prater, I think the board really appreciates the work that you and the staff have done to help us understand this really delicate topic and this really important topic. So thank you. Let's go to 13.01, reports by board members. Who'd like to begin? Anybody?
I'll just say
Dr.
something really
Isabel
quick.
Rodgers.
Sorry, I'll make it really fast. I'm just super excited and happy to have all the students coming back to Slow High. As you know, I live not far away, and so I get to swim through the students in the morning as we're taking my dog for a walk. It's just delightful. They are so happy to be there, and I'm so happy to see them. And it's just full of life, and it's great to have some normalcy back.
Mr. Buckman, anybody? Mrs. Frame?
Yeah. I'd like to thank Mrs. Frame for inviting me to join her at Pacheco and at Teach. It was really good to get back on a campus and see the kids and what was going on. I have to tell you, every time we peeked into a classroom, there was so much hands-on learning, kids sitting on the floor, just projects, kids building a miniature golf course. It was great. And I also heard kudos from Mr. Ryan for keeping class sizes. And some of the schools, they were kind of squished together in the past, and now they're.
The board approves the budget.
Okay, fine. I heard kudos, specifically your name mentioned, sir. And I know that some people thought I might not be here tonight. My application had gone into the city. So I just want to, after a lot of thought and discussion with some of those who urged and indicated support for me, and it's, I've decided to read. People actually sent me the application in my email. I decided to remove my name from consideration, and to be honest, I was really flattered. And I guess to a point, my ego got a little bit ahead of my heart, and I sat and reflected and talked to folks again, and I need to be here. And so I withdrew my application.
Anybody else? Well, I just want to say that I had an opportunity to visit San Luis Obispo High School, and it was a great experience. I got to really have a good conversation with Mr. Dickinson, the new principal, a great conversation with one of the science teachers. And just the new science wing is just phenomenal. It is absolutely phenomenal. I got to go to Bishop's Peak and visit with Bishop's Peak. Mrs. Jones took me around. We were doing a cardboard challenge there. I got to see some wind time, and I got to spend some time in Mrs. King's class. And I want to give a shout out to a student named Kat, who gave me a little present that as I left, some magic stones, and I really appreciated that. And then I was able to attend with Dr. Prater a meeting with Senator Laird, I and some other folks, and I think it's fair to say we're very lucky to have Senator Laird as our senator. He is the chair of the Senate Education Committee, the Education Subcommittee, I believe. He's also on the Budget Committee, so he really gets it. He's quite candid. He likes to come down here, and I think it's great that we have that opportunity to be able to talk with him and meet with him. And so that was a great experience. So thank you. Anybody else? Ms. Dobler-Drew.
I attended Aaron Primer's Zoom award ceremony, and it was wonderful to see the appreciation and how much they're doing to improve the quality of food, how much she's done to improve the quality of food for students and adults alike here at the district, and also how they work around the food supply shortages that have to do with transportation and so forth. And they do a wonderful job of doing local, so we get to eat local as well.
Yeah, and I believe not only was Mrs. Primer quoted in the New York Times, but she was quoted in the Los Angeles Times as well. So she's really, yeah, she's really quite an ambassador for food and for farm to table and high quality food for our students. So thank you. If there's nothing else, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.